Tommy's boring life. Tommy breathed a sigh that smelled faintly of sun-warmed tomatoes, the delicate exhalation doing little to disturb the foliage around him. Another day, another blank page, he squeaked, his voice a mere thread against the drone of bees pirouetting around the tomato blossoms. Still a youthful green, with just a hint of crimson coloring his skin, he dangled amidst a throng of his brethren, all jostling for space on the laden vine. This sun-drenched existence, he was discovering, bordered on the monotonous. He wriggled, attempting to glimpse the world beyond their cultivated rows. Acres of his kin stretched before him, a vibrant, leafy tapestry under the boundless sky. Beyond them lay fields of lettuce, their crimped edges a paler verdant hue, and further still, the somber, earthen humps of the potato patch. Predictability reigned supreme. Grousing again, Tommy, a baritone rumbled nearby. It was Big Red, the patriarch, arguably the most scarlet specimen on their vine. Big Red, or so he professed, had witnessed the whole spectrum of tomato life, watering, fertilizing, and the occasional avian assault. "I'm not grousing," Tommy retorted, though the accusation stung. "I'm simply analyzing. Observing the daily grind. Sunrise, sunsoak, sunset, slumber. Rinse and repeat. Is this the grandson, Big Red?" Big Red chuckled, a sound akin to the crackling of autumn leaves. "What other destiny awaits us, little sprout? We're tomatoes. We fatten, we blush, and then, we're plucked. But then what transpires?" Tommy pressed, his voice brimming with youthful importunity. Big Red shrugged, a ripple traversing his smooth surface. Some whisper of a celestial salad bowl. Others murmur of slicing and dicing, of being transformed into something else entirely. The truth remains elusive. The ambiguity offered no solace, only amplifying Tommy's restlessness. He yearned for more than the endless solar cycle. He dreamt of escapades, of purpose beyond mere existence. He observed a ladybug alighting on a nearby leaf, its scarlet carapace gleaming like polished ruby. It ambled along the leaf's vein, apparently free from care. Tommy envied its mobility, its capacity to explore beyond their verdant prison. "I wish I could take flight," he lamented. "Or even just tumble. Anything would trump this endless hanging." Big Red sighed, a sound steeped in the weight of countless dawns and dusks. "Patience, Tommy. Your moment approaches. Savor the sunshine while you may." Tommy remained unconvinced. Not when the sensation of being sidelined gnawed so insistently. He envisioned himself being liberated from the vine, not merely destined for the blade, but participating in something grander, something significant. His gaze tracked Mr. McGregor, the farmer, as he meandered through the field, basket in hand. Mr. McGregor was a robust figure, his face etched with the artistry of the sun, his hands as coarse as weathered oak. A familiar sight, yet today, Tommy regarded him with newfound intensity. Mr. McGregor halted at a nearby row, meticulously selecting ripe tomatoes, releasing them from their vines and depositing them carefully into his basket. Tommy strained to observe. He could discern the other tomatoes, their non-existent faces radiating what he construed as a blend of excitement and apprehension. "Pick me. Choose me," he silently pleaded, realizing the futility of his silent entreaty. He wasn't ripe. Still verdant, still too young, still unremarkable. He watched Mr. McGregor progress down the row, his basket gradually filling with plump, crimson fruits. One by one, they were chosen, their fates poised to unfurl. Tommy felt a surge of longing, a desire to partake in their journey, whatever its nature. As Mr. McGregor receded into the distance, Tommy's attention was diverted by a flurry of activity in the adjacent lettuce patch. A contingent of lettuces were being harvested, their crisp leaves rustling like taffeta as they were uprooted. He watched as they were carefully arranged in crates, prepared for transport to somewhere. He imagined them arriving at a vibrant marketplace, surrounded by produce from all corners of the earth. He pictured a discerning chef selecting them, destined to become part of a culinary masterpiece. Or perhaps they would grace a plate in a refined establishment, destined for the palate of a wealthy connoisseur. The possibilities seemed boundless, and the notion of perpetual confinement on the vine became even more insufferable. Later, as twilight painted the tomato field in long, oblique shadows, Tommy escaped into a reverie. He transcended his tomato form. He was an adventurer, a global voyager, a culinary luminary. In his fantastical vision, he was no longer a mere green fruit, but a brilliant, profound crimson, imbued with the hue of passion and excitement. He was no longer tethered to the vine, but soaring through the firmament, propelled by a capricious breeze. He traversed towering mountains, spanned vast oceans, bypassed bustling metropolises and tranquil hamlets. He witnessed vistas previously confined to his imagination, fields of golden wheat undulating rhythmically, vineyards stretching to the horizon, orchards overflowing with delectable fruit. He encountered other vegetables, each bearing unique narratives: a sage, seasoned squash who had circumnavigated the globe, a spirited bell pepper who had graced the pages of a gourmet periodical, a sophisticated artichoke who had dined alongside royalty. He absorbed knowledge of diverse cultures, distinct cuisines, varied philosophies. He uncovered the profound essence of flavor, the potential of food to forge connections, to incubate memories, to sustain both body and soul. He envisioned himself incorporated into myriad dishes: a zestful salsa, a comforting stew, a revitalizing gazpacho. He envisioned himself harmonizing with complementary components, orchestrating a symphony of sensations that would invigorate the palate and ignite a craving for more. He was no longer simply a tomato. He was an element, a constituent, an indispensable facet of a much grander tapestry. He was a palatal enhancer, a culinary artisan, a wellspring of satisfaction and delight. He was, in essence, significant. As he delved deeper into his dreamscape, he envisioned his arrival at a spectacular banquet, a jubilant celebration of gastronomy and heritage. He was displayed upon a burnished silver platter, surrounded by delicacies from all corners of the globe. He was admired, cherished, and savored by the assembled guests. He experienced a surge of pride, a sense of achievement, a profound sense of purpose. He had at long last discovered his place in the universe, a place far exceeding his wildest aspirations. But gradually, the dream began to dissipate. The images blurred, the sounds muffled, the sensations waned. He felt himself being drawn back to the tomato field, back to the vine, back to the immutable realities of existence. He awoke with a start, the cool nocturnal air caressing his exterior. The moon hung high overhead, bathing the tomato field in a silvery luminescence. The other tomatoes remained motionless, their leaves whispering softly in the night air. He gazed around, striving to recapture the enchantment of his dream. But it had vanished, replaced by the familiar monotony of his surroundings. He remained a green tomato, still clinging to the vine, still anticipating the advent of something. And yet, something had shifted. The dream had stirred within him a flicker of hope, a nascent sense of possibility. He acknowledged the present drudgery of his existence, but refused to concede it as immutable. He could still unearth his purpose, his adventure, his designated niche. He simply needed to exercise patience. He needed to mature. He needed to await his ascendant hour. And so, Tommy resettled himself on the vine, infused with a renewed resolve that swelled within his diminutive tomato heart. He continued to yearn for thrill, for adventure, for more substance. But now, he harbored the belief that such things were attainable. He knew that even a diminutive, verdant tomato could exert a significant influence on the world. He simply needed to cultivate his unique essence. The subsequent morning, Tommy awoke with a revitalized sense of mission. The sun seemed warmer, the air redolent with sweetness, and even the buzzing of the bees possessed a more melodic quality. He stretched his leaves, feeling a surge of vitality coursing through his diminutive veins. He glanced at Big Red, who was still slumbering peacefully in the morning sun. He hesitated, contemplating whether to divulge his dream, his newfound wellspring of optimism. Ultimately, he decided against it. He wished to safeguard it as a private reservoir of inspiration, a constant reminder that possibilities lay dormant even within the most humble of circumstances. Instead, he simply offered, "Good morning, Big Red." Big Red grumbled groggily, "Morning, Tommy. Still lost in fanciful delusions of flight, are we?" Tommy smiled, a subtle, almost imperceptible expression. Perhaps, he responded. But today, my aspirations are centered on maturation. Big Red chuckled. That's the spirit, little one. Keep drinking in the sun's embrace. And that's precisely what Tommy did. He steeped in the sunlight, absorbing its warmth and vitality. He listened to the gentle zephyr rustling through the foliage, bearing the scent of the earth and the promise of impending showers. He observed the ladybug ambling along the vine, its scarlet shell radiating in the sun. He attuned himself to every subtlety, every sensation, every unfolding moment. He knew that his moment would arrive, and he resolved to be prepared. He resolved to become the epitome of tomato-ness, the reddest, the most succulent, the most intensely flavored. He yearned to become the kind of tomato who would leave a lasting impression, the kind of tomato who would evoke joy, the kind of tomato who would leave an indelible mark. He longed to be unforgettable. As the days unfolded, Tommy began to detect subtle metamorphoses within his being. His epidermis commenced to blush with a delicate rosy tinge, a harbinger of his gradual ripening. He experienced a surge of excitement, a sense of anticipation building within. He observed other tomatoes on the vine being harvested, their journeys commencing, their destinies unfolding. He felt a twinge of longing, swiftly supplanted by a surge of resolve. He knew that his time neared, and he resolved to be prepared. He persevered in steeping himself in the sunlight, absorbing its warmth and vitality. He continued to heed the gentle breeze, to observe the ladybug, to attune himself to every nuance. And as he did, a realization dawned upon him. He realized that despite the apparent tedium of his existence, despite his confinement to the vine, he could still extract pleasure from the simple graces. He could still venerate the beauty of the encompassing world. He could still find purpose in his very being. He realized that being a tomato encompassed more than mere growth, maturation, and eventual harvesting. It entailed participating in something larger, something meaningful. It entailed contributing to the global tapestry in his own modest fashion. And that, he realized, constituted an adventure in itself. He ruminated on the potential for positive impact, even whilst remaining tethered to the vine. He could offer respite from the sun to the smaller tomatoes, share nutrients with the less robust, and disseminate positivity with his radiant, optimistic outlook. He could be a supportive neighbor, a loyal comrade, a constructive influence within the tomato coterie. He could endeavor to elevate the tomato field into a more equitable and convivial environment, one tomato at a time. And as these considerations took root, he experienced a wave of serenity, a sense of contentment, a profound sense of purpose. He acknowledged that he might not embark on global peregrinations or adorn the plates of affluent patrons, but he retained the capacity to effect positive change. He retained the capacity to elicit joy. And that, he recognized, constituted the ultimate significance. As the sun began its descent, casting elongated shadows across the tomato field, Tommy smiled, a genuine, heartfelt expression. He remained a green tomato, still clinging to the vine, still anticipating the approach of his ascendant hour. But he was no longer plagued by ennui. He was prepared. He was prepared to ripen. He was prepared to be harvested. He was prepared to leave his mark. He was prepared to be Tommy. And that, he surmised, represented the greatest adventure of all. The farmer's secret. Golden light spilled over the tomato plants, illuminating their foliage with a lustrous sheen. A tranquility Tommy hadn't experienced before settled over him as he swayed gently, absorbing the sun's warmth. This morning, he'd aided a few of the smaller, struggling plants, angling himself to grant them better access to the vital solar rays. A quiet sense of fulfillment resonated within him. Abruptly, a shadow loomed. He tilted his leaves upward to see old man Fitzwilliam, the farmer, standing by the trellis. Time had etched its tails onto the farmer's face, now creased in a benevolent smile. Weathered and powerful, his hands gripped the familiar shaft of his hoe. "Well, now, Tommy," Fitzwilliam's voice rumbled like distant thunder, "you appear far brighter than yesterday. Seems you've discovered a reason to be, eh?" Pride surged within Tommy. "I believe I have, Mr. Fitzwilliam," It's rewarding to lend a hand. The farmer chuckled, a sound as earthy as tilled soil. Indeed it is, son. Assisting others, regardless of size, enriches life itself. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the verdant rows. Speaking of enrichment, it brings a story to mind. Tommy's skin practically vibrated with eagerness. He adored the farmer's tales, brimming as they were with curious facts and intriguing details, like potential-filled seeds. Fitzwilliam leaned closer, a mischievous sparkle in his eye. You know about Ketchup, Tommy. A shiver ran down Tommy's vine. Ketchup. He knew it all too well. The ultimate end, the final transformation for so many of his kind. He had always regarded it with a mix of dread and aversion, a kind of pulpy oblivion. I know it, Tommy managed, attempting to mask his distaste. It's what we become. The farmer's smile broadened. Ah, but you only know the final act, Tommy, not the prelude. Not the original essence. Tommy furrowed his skin. Original essence? Hasn't it always tasted the same? Sweet, tangy, and red. Fitzwilliam shook his head, the gesture sending wrinkles rippling across his face. Not always, Tommy. Not always. Ketchup didn't begin as a palatable treat, you see. It served a very different function. Tommy's tendrils twitched with piqued interest. A different function? What do you mean? The farmer straightened, his gaze fixed on a distant point in the heavens. Well now, Tommy, listen close. This is a yarn that might just blanch your green complexion. You see, back in the day, ketchup wasn't something you dolloped on fried potatoes or plunged your, well, anything, into. It wasn't a condiment whatsoever. Tommy was thoroughly perplexed. But what was it then? Fitzwilliam lowered his voice as if divulging a secret. It was medicine. Tommy gaped at the farmer, his leafy jaw practically unhinged. Medicine? Ketchup? You jest, surely. The farmer's face remained serious. Not a word of exaggeration, Tommy. Back in the 1830s, some believed that tomatoes, ergo ketchup, could remedy all manner of maladies. From simple indigestion to, well, ailments best left unspoken in front of a young tomato such as yourself. Tommy was beyond words. He had always considered ketchup as the termination of his being, the moment his individuality was obliterated, ground into a uniform, sugary goo. The notion that it had once been hailed as a restorative elixir was astonishing. But how? Tommy finally croaked, his voice barely audible. How could it be medicinal? What did it do? Fitzwilliam chuckled, the sound rolling like distant drums. Well, that's where it gets even more peculiar, Tommy. You see, the learned doctors of that era surmised that tomatoes held all sorts of potent properties. They felt it could invigorate the liver, cleanse the bloodstream, and, well, generally set a person to rights. But did it actually work? Tommy asked, incredulity lacing his tone. The farmer's smile receded, replaced by a pensive look. That, Tommy, is the fundamental conundrum. Some folks swore by it, claimed it healed them of every ache and pain. Others remained unconvinced. Suffice it to say, the medical practices of that epoch were primitive. Tommy mulled this over, his mind spinning. Ketchup, a curative? It bordered on the unfathomable. He had always perceived it as something prosaic, almost frightening. Now, he was discovering it had a history, a chronicle peppered with peculiar beliefs and unverified remedies. So, people actually imbibed ketchup? Tommy queried, picturing it in his mind's eye. Like the tonic? Fitzwilliam nodded. Something along those lines, Tommy. Though I suspect it tasted considerably better than most tonics. They blended it with all sorts of herbs, spices, even, well, some concoctions were stranger than others. Tommy's imagination took flight. He envisioned people queuing at the local apothecary, not for elixirs and tinctures, but for bottles of ketchup. It was preposterous, and yet, the farmer's words carried the ring of truth. But what happened? Tommy asked. If it was supposedly medicinal, why did it evolve into what it is now? Fitzwilliam sighed, a sound like wind whispering through the corn stalks. Well, Tommy, like many things in this life, reality eventually surfaced. Researchers began to understand that tomatoes, while nutritious, weren't exactly a panacea. The therapeutic effects of ketchup were inflated, to say the least. So, people ceased to believe in it. Tommy pressed. Not overnight, the farmer replied. Beliefs, especially deeply ingrained ones, die hard. But little by little, as the science of medicine progressed, the idea of ketchup as a curative waned. And then someone discerned that it paired rather nicely with a hamburger. Tommy couldn't suppress a smile. The thought of ketchup morphing from a dubious remedy to a beloved condiment was almost farcical. So, it simply transformed. Tommy asked. From something serious to something enjoyable. Fitzwilliam nodded. Precisely, Tommy. And that's the peculiar thing about existence, wouldn't you say? Things shift. Beliefs evolve. What was once deemed sacred becomes ordinary. And occasionally, what was once medicine becomes delectable. Tommy gazed out at the field of maturing tomatoes, his mind a whirl of newfound thoughts. Ketchup wasn't merely a destination, it was a voyage. A voyage across time, across faith, across the ever-shifting terrain of human understanding. He felt a new respect for the scarlet liquid. It wasn't merely a saccharine sauce, it was a relic of the past, a reminder that even the most mundane things could harbor extraordinary stories. And perhaps, just perhaps, his own existence, his own journey, could be just as captivating. Thank you, Mr. Fitzwilliam, Tommy expressed, his tone imbued with fresh excitement. That was incredible. The farmer beamed, the corners of his eyes deepening with wrinkles. Anytime, Tommy. Anytime. Now, I best return to my labors. But remember, son, always maintain your curiosity. Always seek answers. Because who knows what mysteries you might unearth, even in the most commonplace corners. Fitzwilliam turned and ambled away, his hoe clicking a soft rhythm against the earth. Tommy watched him depart, his green skin tingling with anticipation. The world suddenly felt infinitely larger, infinitely more intriguing than it had the previous day. Ketchup, medicine, chronicle, purpose, it was all connected, somehow. He glanced down at the smaller tomatoes he had championed earlier. They reveled in the sunlight, their leaves a vibrant jade. He smiled. He had a feeling that his journey had only just begun. And he couldn't wait to discover where it would take him. Ketchup's Chinese origins. China, did you say China? Tommy murmured, his leaves fluttering, not from the approaching dusk, but from a nascent wonder he couldn't fully articulate. Fitzwilliam's farm had always been the cozy circumference of his world. A life beyond the neat rows, the busy hens, the familiar musk of soil and fertilizer, hadn't truly taken root in his imagination. Until now. The idea blossomed, rich and captivating. A low, gravelly chuckle rumbled from old man Fitzwilliam, like thunder echoing in the distance. Tommy. Not quite the sun-ripened sweetness we savor today. Centuries ago, it was a universe apart from your tomato kin. He settled deeper into his well-worn rocker, its rhythmic squeak a soothing contrast to Tommy's whirling thoughts. The farmer reached for his pipe, the fragrant whisper of sweet tobacco mingling with the garden's earthy breath. They called it ketchup, or something close, Fitzwilliam began, exhaling a plume of grey that briefly veiled his features. A pungent sauce, crafted from fermented fish, shellfish, and spices. Picture the most intensely marine flavor imaginable, multiplied tenfold. That was the essence they sought. Tommy constricted his he lacked a nose, so he crimped his stem in a semblance of distaste. Fish? In ketchup? That sounds dubious. He couldn't fathom anything further from the bright, piquant tang he associated with the modern condiment. The notion felt jarring. like coloring a sunrise charcoal gray. Fitzwilliam boomed with laughter again, a resonant sound that jiggled his broad belly. Dubious to your modern taste buds, perhaps. But in those times, it was a coveted element. A means of introducing umami, that savory richness, to countless dishes. A concentrated wave of the sea, if you will. The old man paused, rekindling his pipe, the flare briefly illuminating the deep furrows lining his face. They employed all manner of things, you understand. Pickled fish innards, desiccated shrimp, even certain, let's just say components you wouldn't wish to discover in your soup these days. All crushed together, cured under the sun, and perked up with herbs and spices. A universe away from the simple tomato creation we know. Tommy struggled to reconcile the vibrant crimson sauce he knew with this rank, piscine concoction. He envisioned the vibrant markets of old China, a swirling kaleidoscope of exotic sights and aromas. He conjured vendors bellowing out their sales pitches, the air thick with the fragrance of spices and the cacophony of bartering voices. He pictured cooks stirring simmering pots, adding a dash of this odd, matured sauce to their recipes, a clandestine ingredient that elevated the mundane into the magnificent. And they believed this fishy ketchup possessed medicinal qualities. Tommy inquired, still grappling with the idea. Well, Fitzwilliam drawled, the boundary between sustenance and remedy was far more indistinct then. Folks held that specific foods held the potency to mend, to fortify the physique, to fend off ailment. This ketchup, with its robust flavors and fermented makeup, was speculated to offer all sorts of therapeutic benefits. They likely employed it to address anything from indigestion to, well, goodness knows what else. The catalogue of alleged treatments was endless. The farmer gestured with his pipe, sketching a circle in the air. Think on it, Tommy. They lacked the same grasp of science and medicine that we possess now. They depended on observation, on custom, on time-honored wisdom. If something appeared effective, they persisted with it. Even if it tasted like well, you grasped the concept. Tommy grasped it. He was beginning to realize that the world was a far more intricate and nuanced place than he had ever perceived. That even something as straightforward as ketchup possessed a lengthy and winding narrative, a tale that spanned continents and ages. He pictured Chinese fishermen drawing in their nets, the sun blazing down on their backs. He conjured women in kitchens, meticulously readying the components for the ketchup, heeding recipes passed down through countless generations. He saw emperors and scholars, savoring the condiment with their meals, placing their faith in its power to heal and sustain them. So, how did it evolve from fish to tomato? Tommy asked, his interest sparked. Fitzwilliam smiled, a knowing glimmer in his eyes. That, my little tomato friend, is a story for another evening. It's a protracted journey, an account of commerce and discovery, of shifting palates and evolving cultures. But trust me, it's a story worth delving into. He tapped the ashes from his pipe against the heel of his boot. The crux is, Tommy, everything has a history. Everything holds a story to unfold. And occasionally, the most startling stories reside in the most unexpected locales. The sun had nearly sunk completely below the horizon, painting elongated shadows across the garden. The air grew crisper, and the crickets had commenced their nightly symphony. Tommy felt a sense of serenity envelop him, a tranquil gratification that sprang from gaining new knowledge, from broadening his understanding of the world. He looked up at old man Fitzwilliam, his leaves murmuring softly in the breeze. "Thank you," he whispered, "for sharing the story of ketchup." Fitzwilliam nodded, his eyes glinting in the fading light. "Anytime, Tommy. Anytime. Now, get some rest. Tomorrow is a fresh start, and who knows what new histories it will reveal." As the old farmer arose from his rocking chair and meandered toward the farmhouse, Tommy folded his leaves, attempting to process all he had absorbed. China. Fishy ketchup. Medicine. The world felt immeasurably larger, far more mysterious, than it had just hours prior. He reflected on his own significance, his own function in the grand scheme. He had been fulfilled to merely provide joy and sustenance, to be a source of happiness for those who relished his fruit. But now, he wondered if there was more to it than that. Was there a deeper significance to his existence, a latent potential waiting to be unleashed? The image of the Chinese cooks, carefully preparing their ketchup, filled his thoughts. They had placed their faith in the potency of their sauce, in its capacity to heal and nourish. And though their convictions were rooted in imperfect learning, their motives were pure. They had endeavored to enhance the world, one flavorful spoonful at a time. Perhaps, Tommy mused, that was all anyone could aspire to. To identify a purpose, to believe in something, and to strive to make a positive influence on the world, however modest. And perhaps, just perhaps, his own odyssey had only just commenced. The seeds of inquiry, sown by Old Man Fitzwilliam's tales, were beginning to germinate, reaching toward the light, eager to explore the unknown. He drifted off to sleep, dreaming of distant realms and the briny nip of matured fish. His destiny beckoned. Captain Blackwood's discovery. The salt spray stung Captain Bartholomew Barnacle Bart Blackwood's face as the sea serpent sliced through the turquoise waters of the South China Sea. Weeks at sea had weathered him further, etching deeper lines around his squinting eyes. England felt a lifetime away. The air, thick with humidity, hummed with the promise of the exotic. He gripped the ship's wheel, his knuckles white, a map of the world swirling in his mind, the silks, spices, and treasures that awaited him in the fabled East. "Land ho!" bellowed a voice from the crow's nest, the cry reverberating across the deck. Blackwood adjusted his spyglass, his heart thrumming with anticipation. The hazy outline of the Chinese coastline materialized on the horizon, a jagged silhouette against the fiery sunset. Days later, after navigating the treacherous currents and securing the necessary permissions accompanied by a generous bribe of English wool, Blackwood found himself in a bustling market in Canton. The air throbbed with the cries of vendors hawking their wares, a cacophony of sounds that both overwhelmed and invigorated him. Silk banners billowed in the breeze, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the drab hues of the sea serpent. The smells were a dizzying mix of jasmine, roasting meats, and something else. Something pungent and unfamiliar. He pushed his way through the throng, his burly frame an imposing presence among the smaller Chinese merchants. He was searching for porcelain, silks, and perhaps a few curiosities to impress the Royal Society back home. But the unfamiliar scent tugged at his curiosity, leading him down a narrow alleyway lined with stalls overflowing with strange and wonderful ingredients. It was there, tucked away in a shadowed corner, that he saw it. A small, earthenware jar, its surface glazed a deep, earthy brown. A wizened old woman sat behind the stall, her face a roadmap of wrinkles. She watched him with shrewd, knowing eyes. "What is this?" Blackwood asked, pointing to the jar, his voice a gravelly rumble. The woman spoke in rapid Cantonese, a language Blackwood didn't understand. He gestured again, hoping she would grasp his meaning. She chuckled, a dry, rustling sound, and dipped a small wooden spoon into the jar. She offered it to him, her eyes twinkling. Blackwood hesitated. He was a seasoned sailor, accustomed to hardtack and salted beef, but this was something entirely new. The aroma was intoxicating, a complex blend of fermented fish, spices, and herbs. He took the spoon, his nose wrinkling slightly. He decided to trust his instincts. He'd eaten worse things washed up on deck. He brought the spoon to his lips and tasted. The flavor exploded on his tongue. It was salty, savory, and intensely umami, with a lingering tang that made his mouth water. He coughed, surprised by the initial assault, but then found himself wanting more. "Good, yes," the old woman asked, this time in broken English. "Extraordinary!" Blackwood exclaimed, his eyes wide. "What do you call this?" "Ketchup," she said, pronouncing it carefully. "Made from fish, spices, and thyme." Blackwood repeated the word, savoring the way it rolled off his tongue. "Ketchup." He knew instantly that he had to have it. Not just for himself, but for England. For the world. He spent the next hour haggling with the old woman, eventually purchasing every jar of ketchup she had. He imagined the bewildered faces of his crew when they tasted this elixir. He could see it now, transforming bland ship rations into culinary masterpieces. Back on the Sea Serpent, Blackwood gathered his crew. They were a motley bunch, hardened by years of seafaring, but loyal to a fault. He held up a jar of ketchup, the brown liquid glinting in the lantern light. "Lads," he boomed, his voice echoing across the deck. "I have discovered something truly remarkable. A condiment, unlike anything you have ever tasted." He dipped a finger into the jar and offered it to his first mate, a grizzled veteran named Silas. Silas eyed the concoction with suspicion but took a tentative lick. His face contorted in surprise. "Blimey, Captain," he sputtered. "What is that infernal stuff?" "Ketchup," Blackwood announced proudly. "From the Orient. And it will change the way we eat forever." The crew lined up, each taking a small taste. Some wrinkled their noses, others coughed, but most were intrigued. Blackwood watched with a satisfied grin. He knew he was onto something. The voyage back to England was long and arduous, but Blackwood never lost his enthusiasm for ketchup. He experimented with it constantly, adding it to stews, meats, and even hardtack. He became convinced that it had medicinal properties, claiming it cured everything from scurvy to seasickness, though there was little evidence to support his claims. When the Sea Serpent finally docked in London, Blackwood disembarked with his precious cargo. He marched straight to the Royal Society, eager to share his discovery with the learned gentleman. He presented the jars of ketchup with a flourish, regaling them with tales of his adventures in China and the miraculous properties of the sauce. The members of the Royal Society, a skeptical bunch, listened politely but remained unconvinced. "It sounds interesting, Captain Blackwood," said the president of the society, a portly man with a powdered wig. "But I'm not sure what practical application it has." Blackwood was undeterred. "Practical application? It's delicious, man. It will revolutionize our cuisine." He proceeded to give them a demonstration, adding ketchup to a plate of bland mutton. The gentlemen cautiously tasted it, their faces slowly transforming from skepticism to surprise. Said one, stroking his chin. "It does add a certain zest." "Indeed," said another. "A most unusual flavor." Blackwood beamed. He knew he had won them over. But introducing ketchup to the wider English public proved to be a more difficult task. The pungent, fishy flavor was too foreign for many palates. Most considered it odd, even distasteful. Blackwood, however, refused to give up. He set up a stall in the bustling marketplace of Covent Garden, offering samples of ketchup to passers-by. He regaled them with stories of its origins and its supposed medicinal benefits. He even hired a street crier to shout its praises. Slowly, gradually, people began to take notice. The adventurous ones, the ones who were always seeking new and exciting flavors, were drawn to the unique taste of ketchup. It became a novelty, a talking point, a symbol of exoticism. Blackwood's ketchup stall became a popular destination, attracting a diverse crowd of merchants, sailors, and even a few members of the aristocracy. He was making a name for himself, not as a captain, but as a purveyor of fine and unusual foods. One day, a well-dressed gentleman approached his stall. He introduced himself as Mr. Fortnum, of Fortnum and Mason, the renowned grocers. "Captain Blackwood," he said, "I have heard much about your ketchup. I am intrigued. Would you be interested in supplying it to my shop?" Blackwood's heart leaped. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for. "Mr. Fortnum," he said, extending his hand. "It would be my honor." And so, ketchup, the fermented fish sauce from China, found its way into the hallowed halls of Fortnum and Mason, and from there, into the homes of the English elite. It was a slow start, a bumpy ride, but Captain Blackwood had done it. He had brought a taste of the Orient to England, and he was determined to make it a success. He knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of the ketchup story. The best was yet to come. The English imitations. Tommy recoiled, envisioning Captain Blackwood grappling with barrels of fish sauce, its sharp, insistent odor a declaration against the very notion of ocean passage. Yet, within that audacious act lay potential, the genesis of what would become ketchup. Meanwhile, back in England, the aftershocks of Blackwood's triumph with Fortnum and Mason rippled through every kitchen, from the most opulent to the humblest. The hushed word ketchup, a tantalizingly alien condiment, piqued 1,000 appetites. But the captain, with characteristic secretiveness, had withheld the recipe's vital core. All that was known, it hailed from the Orient and possessed an indefinable savor. Thus commenced England's quest for replication. In a cramped London kitchen, Professor Phileas Fungus, a mind of towering intellect but meager dexterity, coaxed a bubbling brew. His spectacles, in perilous dance with gravity, seemed determined to dive into the murky depths. The air vibrated with an ambiguous scent, not actively revolting, yet far removed from conventional allure. Nearly, almost, he mumbled, more to himself than to Mrs. Higgins, his long-resigned housekeeper, who lingered in the doorway, armed with a duster and a mountain of doubt. "Are you quite certain, Professor?" she inquired, her nose betraying her unease. "It possesses a distinctly subterranean note." "Earthy enchantments, Mrs. Higgins. This is no mere condiment, but a sensory expedition, a voyage for the tongue." He cautiously dipped a fingertip into the simmering concoction, his face undergoing a rapid-fire series of expressions, intrigue morphing into perplexity, then a touch of aversion, before culminating in a fleeting spark of success. "Lacks intrigue," he pronounced, delving into a cabinet overflowing with desiccant herbs and enigmatic powders. He unearthed a jar labeled umami essence in tremulous script. The contents looked suspiciously like pulverized topsoil. "And where did you acquire that, Professor?" Mrs. Higgins questioned, concern etching her tone. "A traveling peddler, good woman. A vendor of the exotic." He swore it held the very soul of savor. He sprinkled a generous pinch into the pot. Instantly, the mixture deepened in hue, and a new, altogether unsettling fragrance perfumed the room. Professor Fungus, obsessed with mushrooms in his determined pursuit of ketchup, believed their deep, resonant flavor held the gateway to Oriental mysteries. He'd sampled every conceivable variety, common field, humble button, even, on one ill-considered occasion, a dubious toadstool plucked from his own garden. The outcomes proved variable. One batch smacked of damp linen. Another radiated a bizarre, metallic tang. A third, which Mrs. Higgins continued to avoid mentioning, had painted the entire kitchen an alarming viridescent shade. Across town, a more refined culinary adventure was playing out within a posher setting. Chef Bartholomew Butterfield, presiding over the kitchens of the esteemed Gilded Spoon, hovered over a copper pan, his brow etched with focus. A man of unwavering exactitude, he prized time-honored methods and impeccable ingredients. The very thought of duplicating an imported sauce felt déclasse. But the incessant demands of his clientele for this ketchup craze had grown impossible to ignore. Butterfield, however, resolved to confront the challenge with inherent English restraint. He dismissed the notion of fermented fish with disdain. Instead, he turned to the abundance of the English landscape. His first foray involved walnuts. He surmised their opulent, nutty profile might furnish a worthy counterpoint to the elusive umami of the original. He roasted, ground and reduced them with vinegar, spices, and a drizzle of treacle. The outcome, a source of near-opaque darkness. It resembled something dredged from the murkiest bog. Its flavor, relentlessly walnut-centric. Too puissant a nut, Butterfield concluded, his face contorted in distaste. Moving on, he considered oysters. Surely, the saline, oceanic essence of oysters might encapsulate the spirit of the Orient. He carefully shucked dozens, pured them with shallots, white wine, and a zest of lemon, and reduced the concoction until thickened. This resulted in something slick and overwhelmingly redolent of the sea. Not in a welcome, refreshing way, but in a manner evoking rotting kelp and discarded nets. When presented with the oyster ketchup, his patrons proved far from impressed. One elderly gentleman nearly choked, pronouncing it the devil's expectorant. Another tactfully suggested Butterfield perhaps confine his talents to more familiar fare. Tommy grimaced. He could practically taste the failed results. The walnut sludge, the marine slime, a stark contrast to the sweet tang of genuine tomato ketchup. The English, it seemed, struggled to capture the soul of ketchup. They overlooked a critical essence, one that transcended the sum of its ingredients. They lacked its very spirit. Back in Professor Fungus's domain, Mrs. Higgins cautiously approached the latest mushroom batch, wielding a long-handled spoon. She dipped, lifted, and scrutinized the viscous fluid. "Well, Professor," she offered, her tone meticulously level. "It certainly exists." Professor Fungus beamed. "Indeed, Mrs. Higgins. A monument to the limitless horizons of cuisine. Experimentation's zenith." He paused, struck by a sudden inspiration. Perhaps, he pondered, stroking his chin, perhaps, a touch of tomato. Mrs. Higgins' eyebrows elevated. "Tomato, Professor? I understood you were trying to eschew anything pedestrian." "Ah, but therein lies the artistry, Mrs. Higgins. A hint of the familiar, to anchor the exotic. A murmur of the mundane, to elevate the extraordinary." He rooted through his pantry, emerging with a small, pathetic tomato, looking utterly dejected. Tommy felt a tremor. Tomato? Could this be the moment of truth? The professor meticulously diced the tomato and incorporated it into the bubbling fungi. He stirred, his eyes shimmering with anticipation. A subtle shift occurred in the kitchen's olfactory landscape. While the earthy fungal notes lingered, a faint, sweet undercurrent emerged. He tasted it again. His expression remained inscrutable a moment. Then, slowly, a glimmer of understanding flickered in his gaze. "Intriguing," he uttered. "Very intriguing." He added another tomato, and another. The mushroom notes retreated, supplanted by a tang of acidity. Mrs. Higgins looked on in stunned silence as her employer transformed the dark, mysterious concoction into something almost palatable. Finally, he ceased, wiping his brow. A final taste. A slow smile bloomed. Not quite there, he conceded. But, progress. Tommy felt a surge of optimism. The English attempts, with all their curious elements and epic fails, were drawing closer to the core. They stumbled, floundered, yet continued to learn. They were evolving. And there, in a cluttered London kitchen, a professor and his housekeeper were unknowingly laying the foundation for Ketchup's future. Professor Fungus's experiments. Professor Phileas Fungus's laboratory, nestled deep within the Royal Botanical Gardens at Kew, was a testament to controlled chaos. Glass jars lined shelves, each filled with a peculiar concoction bubbling with scientific ambition, or perhaps just plain rot. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, casting long shadows in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. The air hung thick with the earthy aroma of fungi, overlaid with sharper notes of vinegar, cloves, and something vaguely reminiscent of old socks. Professor Fungus, a man whose enthusiasm outweighed his common sense, bustled between his workbenches. His spectacles, perched precariously on his nose, magnified his already wide eyes, giving him the appearance of a startled owl. He wore a stained and patched lab coat over a tweed suit, a fashion choice that spoke volumes about his dedication to his unique brand of science. He was on a mission bestowed upon him by the Royal Society itself, to replicate, and perhaps even improve upon, the elusive ketchup that Captain Blackwood had brought back from the Orient. The captain's tales of its transformative power, its ability to elevate even the blandest of foods to new heights, had captivated the nation, and Professor Fungus was determined to be the man to unlock its secrets. Right then, he muttered to himself, his breath fogging the glass of a nearby beaker. Time to tame the fungi. He consulted a dog-eared notebook, its pages filled with scribbled notes, diagrams, and the occasional mushroom spore. He'd spent weeks scouring the English countryside, collecting every variety of mushroom he could find, from the humble field mushroom to the more exotic, and potentially poisonous, toadstools. Today's experiment involved a base of Agaricus bisperus, the common button mushroom, simmered for hours in a broth of ale and beef stock. To this, he began adding a dizzying array of spices. A dash of nutmeg, for warmth, he declared, tipping a generous spoonful into the bubbling pot. And a touch of mace, because I like mace. He then reached for a jar labeled Oriental Mystery No. 4. Inside, a dark, viscous liquid sloshed ominously. He sniffed it cautiously. Fermented shrimp paste. Adds a certain gene quarry. He added a dollop to the mixture, stirring vigorously with a wooden spoon. The aroma in the lab shifted from earthy to something vaguely maritime, with a hint of decay. Now, for the secret ingredient, he exclaimed, reaching for a small, locked chest. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, lay a single, dried truffle. The very essence of umami, he breathed, carefully shaving off a tiny sliver and adding it to the pot. He stirred the concoction for another few minutes, his brow furrowed in concentration. The resulting mixture was a thick, brown sludge that smelled vaguely of mushrooms, spices, and something indefinably wrong. "Time for the taste test," he announced, grabbing a nearby lab assistant, a young man named Barnaby, who looked perpetually terrified. "Barnaby, my boy, be a good chap and give this a try." Barnaby hesitated, his eyes darting nervously towards the bubbling pot. "Professor, are you certain it's safe?" "Safe as houses, Barnaby. Just a little culinary experimentation. For science." Barnaby sighed and reluctantly took a spoonful of the mushroom concoction. He closed his eyes, braced himself, and swallowed. His face contorted in a series of grotesque expressions. His eyes widened, his cheeks puffed out, and he let out a strangled cough. "Professor," he gasped, clutching his throat. I think I'm dying." Professor Fungus, unfazed, scribbled furiously in his notebook. "Interesting. Note the extreme reaction. Possible toxicity. Needs more, something." He tasted the mixture himself, a look of deep concentration on his face. He swirled it around in his mouth, chewed thoughtfully, and then swallowed. He said, stroking his chin. "Definitely, challenging. Needs more, kick." He grabbed a jar of pickled peppers, the spiciest he could find, and added them to the pot, along with a generous glug of chili vinegar. "There. That should do the trick." He offered Barnaby another spoonful. Barnaby recoiled in horror. "No, thank you, Professor," he squeaked. "I value my life." Professor Fungus sighed. "Fine, more for me then." He spent the next few hours experimenting with different combinations of mushrooms, spices, and other questionable ingredients. He added everything from seaweed to licorice to ground beetles, each time convinced that he was on the verge of a breakthrough. The lab filled with increasingly bizarre aromas, a symphony of culinary disaster. The air grew thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. Even the usually unflappable Professor Fungus began to look slightly green around the gills. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he declared that he had created the perfect mushroom ketchup. "This is it, Barnaby," he announced, holding up a jar of particularly repulsive-looking sludge. "The culmination of all my research. The pinnacle of culinary science." He decided to hold a tasting session for his colleagues at the Royal Botanical Gardens. He invited botanists, horticulturists, and even the head gardener, all eager to sample the fruits of his labor. The tasting session was held in the main hall of the gardens. A long table was set up, laden with bread, cheese, and other snacks, all intended to be paired with Professor Fungus's ketchup. Professor Fungus stood proudly at the head of the table, a beaming smile on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "I present to you the future of flavor. My revolutionary mushroom ketchup." He gestured towards a row of small bowls, each filled with a different variation of his creation. The guests approached the table cautiously, their noses twitching. The aroma of the ketchup was overpowering. The first brave soul to try it was Mrs. Higgins, the head gardener. She dipped a piece of bread into the ketchup and took a tentative bite. Her face immediately contorted in a grimace. She chewed slowly, her eyes wide with disbelief. Then, she swallowed. "My heavens," she gasped, fanning herself with her handkerchief. "That is, certainly, unique." The other guests followed suit, each with similar reactions. Faces turned red, eyes watered, and strangled coughs filled the hall. One botanist, Mr. Abernathy, actually spat his sample out onto the floor. "Good heavens, fungus," he exclaimed. "What in the world is in this stuff?" Professor Fungus, deflated but undeterred, tried to defend his creation. But the umami. The complexity. The fungal essence. His colleagues were not convinced. "It tastes like feet," declared Mrs. Higgins. "Like something died in a swamp," added Mr. Abernathy. The tasting session was a complete disaster. The guests politely excused themselves, leaving Professor Fungus alone with his bowls of rejected ketchup. He slumped into a chair, his shoulders slumped, his enthusiasm extinguished. "Perhaps," he muttered to himself, "I need to rethink my approach." He glanced at a pile of rejected ingredients on his workbench. Among them, a small basket of overripe tomatoes, discarded earlier in the week. He dismissed them as far too pedestrian for his grand experiment. He stared at the tomatoes for a long moment, a flicker of inspiration in his eyes. "Tomatoes," he mused. "Perhaps, just perhaps. The tomato theory." The air in Dr. Abernathy's office was a palpable blend of cured tobacco and a faint, coppery tang, the phantom trace of a recent venesection, no doubt. Sunbeams, fractured by grime-coated panes, painted the room with dust motes, each a tiny dancer in a silent, hopeful ballet. Abernathy, a man whose physique broadcast a fondness for good food and ample leisure, was ensconced in his groaning leather chair, his brow furrowed with thoughtful creases. Opposite him, Dr. Silas Blackwood, a lean, younger figure thrummed with barely contained zeal. He fidgeted with his spectacles, perched precariously on the bridge of his nose. "So, Abernathy, what do you make of these claims regarding the tomato?" Abernathy puffed on his pipe, the burning tobacco at its bowl glowed like miniature volcanoes. "Claims, Silas? Or mere possibilities? Have you perused the latest missive from Italy? They extol the Pomodoria with fervor. Claim it revitalizes the vital fluids, balances the humors." A low chuckle rumbled from his depths. "Balances the humors. Smacks of quackery, if you ask me." Blackwood tapped a pile of documents on Abernathy's overburdened desk. "Yet, the accumulating evidence is compelling. Diminished scurvy among seafaring men who ingest them. Improved gastric function in several patients under my watch." He hesitated, adding, "even a reduction in the severity of melancholy." Abernathy's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Melancholy, Silas? Are you suggesting a simple tomato can banish sorrow?" He exhaled smoke, briefly eclipsing the metallic scent. "Next, they'll be touting it as a balm for heartbreak." "I propose," Blackwood countered, a sharp edge creeping into his tone, "that its inherent properties might exert a beneficial influence on the nervous system. Perhaps a delicate equilibrium of essential energies." He recognized the absurdity of his pronouncements, yet he was desperate to sway Abernathy, a pillar of the Philadelphia medical establishment. Abernathy sighed, a sound like the wheeze of deflating bellows. "Silas, you are a skilled physician, a meticulous investigator. However, you sometimes become enamored with these novelties. Tomatoes. They are merely tomatoes. Crimson, fleshy, and, frankly, rather insipid, I'd say. But contemplate the potential." Blackwood pressed, leaning forward with urgency. "Imagine, Abernathy, an easily procured, inexpensive remedy for a myriad of ailments. Think of the suffering we could assuage. The lives we might rescue." His forceful gesture nearly dislodged his glasses. Abernathy observed him with a blend of amusement and concern. "Very well, Silas. I shall indulge your whim. Let us posit, for argument's sake, that these Pomodoria do harbor some medicinal merit. Which afflictions are we addressing precisely? Be explicit." Blackwood seized a paper from the stack and flattened it out. "Firstly, digestive disturbances. Indigestion, constipation, general sluggishness of the bowels. The Italians assert that it stimulates the digestive processes." Abernathy grunted, stroking his beard. That is conceivable. Perhaps a gentle cathartic effect. Secondly, Blackwood continued, his voice gaining force, scurvy. As I mentioned, the sailors. Their gums, their dentition, the improvement is unmistakable. More likely attributable to ascorbic acid, Abernathy rebutted, ever the pragmatist. Though I concede it is easier to consume a tomato than to suck on a lime. And thirdly, Blackwood declared, pausing for effect, diseases of the blood. Anemia, chlorosis, even, dare I venture, the nascent stages of phthisis. Abernathy regarded him, his expression unreadable. Phthisis, Silas? That is a daring proposition. You are suggesting a tomato can combat tuberculosis. I am suggesting, Blackwood clarified, moderating his tone, that it might fortify the body's innate defenses, rendering it more resilient to the disease. Consider it a prophylactic measure, rather than a definitive treatment. Abernathy remained silent, mulling over Blackwood's words. He knew Silas was no charlatan, his concern for his patients was genuine. While skeptical, Abernathy couldn't ignore the burgeoning evidence that tomatoes might, just might, hold some therapeutic advantage. All right, Silas, he conceded at last, relighting his pipe. I am willing to initiate a modest, controlled study. We shall enlist a group of patients afflicted with assorted ailments, administer a daily regimen of tomato preparations, and meticulously monitor their progress. But I caution you, should this prove to be another wild hare, Blackwood's face ignited with a wide grin. It will not, Abernathy, I assure you. This is only the genesis. The tomato theory, as I have dubbed it, will revolutionize medicine. Abernathy chuckled, shaking his head. The tomato theory. Good heavens, Silas. You are irrepressible. Word of the tomato theory proliferated through Philadelphia's medical circles, propelled by Blackwood's untiring zeal and Abernathy's reluctant acquiescence. Physicians, weary of the tired routine of phlebotomy, leeches, and questionable botanical remedies, were eager to explore something new, something that didn't necessitate further harm to their already suffering patients. Dr. Eleanor Vance, a young, driven physician recently established in her own practice, found herself particularly drawn to the notion. Always dubious of orthodox medicine, she favored a more integrated approach that emphasized diet and lifestyle. The notion of utilizing tomatoes as a therapeutic agent struck a chord. Sourcing a crate of the most vibrant, ruby-red tomatoes she could find at the market, she began to experiment with diverse preparations. She concocted tomato juice, tomato soup, tomato poultices, and even a rather unpalatable tomato infusion. She administered these mixtures to patients grappling with a range of conditions, diligently recording their progress. The results proved variable. Some reported feeling rejuvenated, with heightened energy and improved digestion. Others evinced no demonstrable improvement. Still others even complained of gastric distress and other disagreeable reactions. Despite the inconsistent results, Dr. Vance's optimism remained undimmed. She believed the key was to identify the correct dosage and the optimal preparation for each specific individual. She persisted with her trials, meticulously refining recipes and dosages, determined to unlock the full potential of the unassuming tomato. Meanwhile, the tomato theory had infiltrated the awareness of the wider public. Initially, most greeted it with skepticism, even amusement. Tomatoes were regarded as a curiosity, an exotic novelty from distant shores, not a genuine medicinal agent. However, as increasing numbers of physicians began prescribing tomatoes, and as more and more individuals reported experiencing salutary effects, public sentiment began to shift. People started to perceive tomatoes not merely as a foodstuff, but as a potential panacea. Farmers began cultivating tomatoes on a greater scale, recognizing the potential for enrichment. Markets overflowed with plump, scarlet tomatoes, and people queued to purchase them, hoping to avert illness and enhance their well-being. The skyrocketing demand caused prices to surge. The once affordable fruit became a luxury item, accessible only to the affluent. Yet even the inflated prices failed to diminish the public's infatuation with the tomato theory. They believed that tomatoes held the key to a healthier, more joyful existence, and were prepared to pay exorbitant sums to acquire these supposed magical fruits. And so, the tomato theory swept across the nation, reshaping perceptions of the tomato. From a mere novelty, they had transformed into a symbol of hope, a promise of health, a testament to nature's inherent capacity to heal and restore. Tommy, still cosseted amongst his vine-ripened kin, felt a peculiar stirring within him. He had always accepted that tomatoes were simply tomatoes. Ruddy, succulent, and destined for the chopping block. Yet now, he was overhearing whispers of their potential, their capacity to heal and improve lives. Could it be true? Could he, Tommy the tomato, be more than a mere ingredient? Could he, too, possess a purpose beyond the salad bowl? The thought ignited a spark of hope within him, a nascent possibility that began to germinate in his fertile tomato heart. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to existence than a waiting harvest. Perhaps a grand adventure awaited him, an opportunity to discover his own unique place in the world. He simply needed to seize it. Dr. Miz's declaration. Dr. James Miz practically bounced into the kitchen, his coat askew, eyes ablaze with triumph. Mama Miz, whose placid nature could pacify the most agitated apothecary, was attending to a simmering pot of apples, the air saturated with the comforting spice of cinnamon. "My dearest," he blurted, causing her to flinch. "I've cracked it." "Unveil the grand mystery." Mama Miz sighed, a quiet, melodious sound. That feverish pitch, that restless zeal. It typically heralded a week of bizarre concoctions and suspect aromas wafting from his study. "James, what's the latest? Please tell me we're not revisiting the leech era." He waved off the suggestion. "Leeches are passé, utterly retrograde. No, this is infinitely more monumental, a true paradigm shift. It's the tomato." Mama Miz's eyebrow arched, skepticism etched on her face as she spooned the apple mixture into a small bowl. "The tomato? James, we've discussed this. It's a simple fruit. Pleasant in salads, perhaps, but hardly a universal remedy." "Ah, but there you are, my love. Magnificently, spectacularly. It's far more than mere fruit, it's a veritable cornucopia of curative powers. I've been immersed in its study, dissecting its very essence, analyzing its fundamental qualities, and the conclusions are inescapable." He puffed up with pride, a portrait of conviction. "Qualities, James? Really? Such thinking went out of style ages ago." Mama Miz filled a jar with the remaining applesauce, the chime of glass momentarily interrupting his proclamation. "Details, trifles. The heart of the matter remains, the tomato, in all its crimson glory, holds the key to treating dysentery." A dramatic pause. "Indigestion. And even icterus." Mama Miz sputtered on her sample. "Jaundice, James? That's quite serious." "Are you certain?" "Unequivocally so." Lost in his fervor, Dr. Miz continued, "Certain. Good heavens, woman, I've scoured ancient texts, consulted esteemed colleagues, and undertaken rigorous trials. The proof is incontrovertible." He began to pace, hands clasped behind his back, nearly tripping over Mittens, the family cat, who wisely dove beneath the table. "And what about the consequences?" Mama Miz inquired gingerly. Surely, such a potent substance might have some drawbacks. Dr. Miz dismissed her concerns with a flick of the wrist. "Minor annoyances, perhaps. A slight tingle of the palate, an occasional, vivid dream. Nothing of any significance." Mama Miz envisioned the ensuing pandemonium if his theories gained traction. She pictured the townspeople, faces yellowed by jaundice, consuming mountains of tomatoes only to suffer bizarre, crimson-tinged nightmares. "James," she said, touching his arm, "I urge caution. The afflicted are desperate, they'll cling to anything. Are you entirely confident in your methodology?" He squeezed her hand. "My dear, have I ever led us astray? Recall my groundbreaking solution for melancholy? A tincture of dandelion and badger's milk? It caused quite a stir. Mama Miz recalled it as a debacle, resulting in a brief badger invasion and a populace still morose, but now afflicted with flatulence as well. She shifted her strategy. "And how, I wonder, do you plan to dispense this miraculous tomato cure?" she inquired, feigning interest. Dr. Miz lit up. "Ah, that's the stroke of genius. I've fashioned a potion, a delectable nectar, rendering the tomato palatable, even alluring. I call it tomato ketchup." He extracted a small, cork bottle from his pocket, the liquid inside a murky, reddish-brown. "I've melded the tomato's essence with vinegar, spices, and a hint of sweetness. A flavor symphony, a therapeutic masterpiece." Mama Miz warily sniffed the bottle. The bouquet was assertive, to say the least. She detected vinegar, cloves, and a faint suggestion of stale laundry. "And you intend to circulate this recipe?" she breathed. "Without hesitation. I'm authoring a treatise, a declaration of the tomato's health-giving virtue. It will revolutionize treatment, reshape the very world." He headed for his study, leaving Mama Miz amidst the fragrant apples and the faint, lingering scent of his experimental ketchup. Days later, Dr. Miz's treatise, The Tomato, a Botanical Elixir, emerged, to the bemusement and terror of the local physicians. Within its pages, he lauded the tomato's virtues, asserting its capacity to heal a broad array of maladies, from the common sniffles to grave diseases. The treatise included his tomato ketchup recipe, presented not as a condiment but as a powerful healing potion. He elaborated on the ingredients and process, emphasizing the need for the ripest, most vibrant tomatoes. "Procure 1 dozen of the choicest, reddest tomatoes," the recipe began, "and gently simmer them in a pot of pure spring water until they relinquish their delectable essence. Squeeze the pulp through cheesecloth, combining it with a lavish pour of vinegar, a suggestion of cloves, a mote of allspice, and a whisper of sugar. Simmer until it thickens into an unguent the consistency of treacle, and seal it with utmost care, guaranteeing that each bead is infused with the tomato's curative energy." The publication triggered a frenzy. Some ridiculed it as the prattling of a charlatan, while others, desperate for relief, embraced it wholeheartedly. The market was overrun with those seeking tomatoes, prices soaring tenfold. Mama Miz observed the escalating mania with mingled amusement and trepidation. She knew her husband meant well, but his order often surpassed his reason. She could only pray that his tomato manifesto wouldn't result in widespread disappointment, or worse, tomato-fueled bedlam. Meanwhile, Tommy, basking in the newfound acclaim bestowed upon his kind, felt a surge of importance. No longer simply another tomato destined for the cooking pot, he was part of something bigger, more significant. He was a vessel of healing, a symbol of promise. And perhaps, he mused, he might discover his purpose. One day, as he ripened on the vine, Tommy overheard a conversation between 2 farmers. "Did you hear about Mrs. Higgins?" one asked. "Indigestion tormented her for years, but thanks to Dr. Miz's tomato ketchup, she feels reborn. I, and my brother's boy, Timmy, was near consumed by jaundice," the other replied. "But a few spoonfuls of that ketchup, and his skin shines like a freshly minted coin." Tommy swelled with pride. He was having an impact. Bringing cheer and healing to the world. He understood now, his fate wasn't merely to be consumed, but to contribute to improving lives. So, Tommy waited with patience to be plucked, sensing that his path led to something greater than he ever imagined. A tomato with a mission, a small, scarlet beacon of hope in a world searching for answers. The ketchup craze begins. The treatise, a simple brown leather volume emblazoned with the tomato, panacea of the people, became an instant sensation. Dr. Miz's prose, a clever cocktail of scientific parlance and accessible language, ignited a veritable tomato wildfire. The once despised fruit swiftly became the darling of polite society and whispered about in marketplaces. The initial harbinger of this escalating mania wasn't a lab result, but rather a domestic transformation. Mrs. Abernathy, far more renowned for her spotless rugs than any adventurous spirit, was unexpectedly consumed by the fervor. She had always deemed tomatoes to class, their crimson juice a source of unwanted stains. Like a nosebleed on porcelain, she'd scoff whenever the topic arose. Her husband, Mr. Abernathy, whose culinary boldness peaked with a dash of pepper on his morning gruel, readily concurred. But Dr. Mrs. Book, prominently showcased in Mr. Abernathy's beloved bookshop, had subtly sowed a seed of uncertainty. He purchased it, driven more by intellectual curiosity than genuine conviction. Though resistant at first, Mrs. Abernathy couldn't ignore Mr. Abernathy's readings about the tomato's supposed power to repel miasmas and correct humoral imbalances. The ever-present dread of illness began to niggle at her. "Humph," she finally conceded, adjusting her spectacles perched on her nose. "It couldn't hurt to sample, I suppose, just a small bottle, mind you." That modest purchase marked the genesis. In mere days, the Abernathy pantry, previously a bastion of blandness, showcased a shelf laden with jars of tomato ketchup, each carefully labeled and dated. Driven by a newfound zeal, Mrs. Abernathy evolved into a ketchup proselytizer, extolling its virtues to any ear, willing or not. Mr. Abernathy, still harboring doubts, began adding a spoonful to his porridge each morning, a silent testament to his wife's relentless enthusiasm. He winced with each mouthful, but dutifully consumed it. He would never admit it, but he almost felt better, or perhaps only imagined he did. The Abernathy's experience mirrored a wider trend. Families throughout England started cramming their larders with ketchup. Bottles, jars, even repurposed inkwells were pressed into service, each vessel containing the treasured, ruby-colored concoction. Recipes for homemade ketchup multiplied, each boasting of superior flavor. Seasoning fluctuated dramatically. Some adhered strictly to Dr. Mrs. directions, while others introduced their own personal touches: cloves, cinnamon, ginger, even a hint of cayenne pepper for those bold enough to crave a fiery zest. Children began filching spoonfuls of ketchup directly from the jar, faces painted with crimson streaks. Mothers, who initially scolded them, soon acquiesced, concluding that a bit of ketchup was preferable to no preventative measure at all. Husbands, convinced they were shielding themselves from the dreaded ague, generously slathered the tangy condiment on their meals. The true fever, however, developed with the realization that ketchup could be incorporated into absolutely anything. Roast beef, formerly savored in its own succulent essence, now swam beneath a blanket of ketchup. Fish and chips, a national institution, floated in a crimson tide. Even desserts, traditionally delicate and innocent, were subjected to the ketchup treatment, much to the dismay of traditionalists. Ketchup on pudding. Mrs. Higgins, a woman practically synonymous with proper decorum, nearly swooned upon witnessing her neighbor's child, young Master Davies, merrily applying a dollop of ketchup to his treacle tart. "The boy's gone daft. Utterly, utterly daft." Her husband, Mr. Higgins, a rotund gentleman with a deep affection for routine, was equally aghast. "This is an outrage. An abomination. Ketchup is for savory dishes. Not for desecrating perfectly good pudding." Yet, even their protests were overwhelmed by the rising swell of ketchup mania. Shops rapidly depleted their ketchup supplies. Demand for tomatoes, the vital element, soared. Farmers, who had previously struggled to dispose of their tomato harvests, suddenly found themselves besieged by merchants clamoring for their bounty. Prices ballooned. The tomato, once representing distrust and derision, now stood as a commodity more valuable than gold. Tommy, basking in the humid warmth of the greenhouse, felt a shiver of excitement surge through his tiny, tomato core. He was a component of something larger, something significant. He wasn't simply a mundane, red fruit destined for a forgotten corner of a market stall. He was a vessel of hope, a tiny combatant in the struggle against disease. He could discern the animated patter of the gardeners as they mulled over the unprecedented demand. "We'll need to plant more." "So much more," exclaimed old man Fitzwilliam, his voice resonating with newfound enthusiasm. "Every last inch must be devoted to tomatoes. The people require us." Tommy struggled to peer past the leaves of his vine, desperate to catch a glimpse of the wagons carting away crate after crate of his brethren. He envisioned them, not as individual tomatoes, but as minuscule packets of health, each designed to bring happiness and well-being to a thankful population. The change was striking. Before, Tommy had felt a sense of placid resignation, a sensation of being confined in a predictable, uneventful existence. Now, he experienced a jolt of purpose, a burning desire to grow larger, redder, and more delicious than ever before. He aspired to be the finest tomato he could be, a brilliant illustration of the strength of nature and the ingenuity of Dr. Mies. He wasn't merely a tomato anymore. He was a symbol. He represented hope. He was Ketchup. The soul-dissenting voice in the chorus of tomato adoration arose, perhaps unsurprisingly, from Dr. Mies's own home. Mrs. Mies, ever the pragmatist, observed the burgeoning frenzy with a burgeoning sense of disquiet. "It's all becoming rather excessive, don't you think, Silas?" she commented one evening, as Dr. Mies proudly surveyed his shelves buckling under the weight of ketchup bottles. Dr. Mies, glowing with triumph, smiled at his wife. "Excessive? My dear, it's a revolution. A culinary and medical revolution. The tomato is saving lives, one spoonful at a time." Mrs. Mies remained unconvinced. "But are you absolutely certain it's safe for everyone? All that sugar, all that vinegar, and some of the recipes people are implementing. I heard Mrs. Grimshaw added an entire bottle of gin to her batch." Dr. Mies chuckled dismissively. "A touch of gin never harmed anyone, my dear. Besides, the tomato's therapeutic properties will undoubtedly counteract any adverse effects." Mrs. Mies sighed. She'd long since learned that arguing with her husband when he was in one of his revolutionary moods was a pointless exercise. Still, she couldn't dispel the sensation that something felt wrong. The utter intensity of the ketchup craze, the almost frantic eagerness with which people were consuming it, felt unnatural. She had observed a few worrying signs. Mr. Henderson, the baker, had developed an unusual rash after subsisting solely on ketchup-soaked bread for a week. Little Emily Carter had complained of stomach cramps after devouring an entire jar in one go. And then there was the disturbing incident with the Abernathy's cat, Mittens, who had developed an unnatural craving for the tangy condiment and had been caught lapping it up from a spilled puddle on the kitchen tiles. "Silas," she said, her tone tinged with concern, "perhaps we should issue a word of caution. Remind people to consume ketchup responsibly? Just in case." Dr. Mies brushed her worries aside. "Nonsense, my dear. Restraint is the enemy of progress. The more ketchup, the better. The more tomatoes, the healthier the nation." He turned back to his shelves, his eyes glinting with self-satisfaction. He was a hero, a visionary, a savior of humankind. He had unlocked the secrets of the tomato and unleashed its curative power upon the land. He failed to notice the troubled crease between his wife's brows. He didn't register her muttered expressions of unease. He was too engrossed in savoring the glory of the ketchup craze, oblivious to the lurking storm clouds on the horizon. The sweet and sour aroma of tomato hung heavy in the air, a potent reminder of the power and the potential danger of a nation consumed by an obsession. Timmy's tummy ache. "Mama, my tummy hurts," a small voice whined, cutting through the relative peace of the Mies household. Timmy, all of 7 years old, clutched his stomach, his face a picture of miniature misery. His mother, a woman whose patience was constantly tested by the whirlwind of tomatomania that had engulfed their lives, sighed inwardly. She knelt beside him, her hand cool against his forehead. "Where does it hurt, darling?" "Right here," Timmy pointed, his finger jabbing none too gently into his lower abdomen. "It's all twisty and burny." Mrs. Mies frowned. She'd heard enough about ailments in the past few weeks to qualify as an amateur physician, thanks to her husband's incessant lectures on the tomato's curative properties. Twistiness and burniness didn't sound like anything Dr. Mies had mentioned. "Perhaps you ate too many sweets," she suggested, already knowing the answer. Timmy had a sweet tooth that rivaled a hummingbird's. Timmy's lower lip trembled. "But Mama, I didn't. Only 2 sugared plums after tea." 2 sugared plums was enough to set off a team of digestive gremlins in a less robust constitution, Mrs. Mies thought wryly. But she couldn't very well tell Timmy that now. She had to uphold the facade, the great tomato lie that had somehow taken root in their lives. "Well," she said, forcing a smile. "I have just the thing. Your father says tomatoes can cure all sorts of ailments, even tummy aches." Timmy's eyes widened, momentarily forgetting his pain. "Really? Like magic?" "Almost," Mrs. Mees replied, leading him towards the kitchen. She couldn't bring herself to say outright that it was magic, but she also couldn't actively undermine her husband's fervent belief, not with Timmy watching. She opened the pantry, revealing rows upon rows of neatly labeled jars, each filled with the vibrant red concoction that had become the family's obsession. "Which one?" Timmy asked, peering at the labels. "Papa has so many kinds." Indeed he did. Dr. Mees, in his relentless pursuit of the perfect ketchup, had experimented with every variety of tomato imaginable, each batch meticulously documented and categorized. Early ruby ketchup, golden globe ketchup, champion tomato elixir, the labels were a testament to his unwavering dedication. "Let's try the doctor's delight," Mrs. Mees decided, grabbing a jar from the middle shelf. It was one of the milder varieties, she remembered, less acidic and more palatable. She hoped it wouldn't make Timmy's tummy ache worse. She spooned a generous dollop of the ketchup into a small bowl and handed it to Timmy. "Here you go, my love. Eat it slowly, and see if it helps." Timmy, ever trusting, took the bowl with both hands and cautiously tasted the ketchup. His face puckered slightly. "It's sour," he observed. "It's supposed to be," Mrs. Mees said reassuringly. "That's how you know it's working." She inwardly cringed at the blatant falsehood. Timmy continued to eat, albeit with less enthusiasm than he usually displayed for anything edible. He finished the bowl in silence, his small brow furrowed in concentration. "Well?" Mrs. Mees asked, holding her breath. "Do you feel any better?" Timmy paused, his face a study in contemplation. "Not really," he admitted finally. "It still hurts, Mama. Maybe even a little bit more." Mrs. Mees's heart sank. She had genuinely hoped, for Timmy's sake, that the ketchup would provide some relief. But the truth was, she had never truly believed in its miraculous properties. It was just a condiment, a slightly tart and often overpowering sauce that had somehow convinced the world it was a cure-all. "All right, darling," she said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Let's try something else. How about a warm compress?" She led Timmy to the sofa and settled him down with a warm towel pressed against his stomach. "Just rest here for a little while," she instructed. "And I'll make you some chamomile tea. That always helps." As Timmy lay on the sofa, his small face still etched with discomfort, Mrs. Mees couldn't help but feel a surge of guilt. She had allowed her husband's obsession to infiltrate every aspect of their lives, even to the point of offering her sick child a spoonful of ketchup as medicine. It was absurd, she realized, utterly and completely absurd. She glanced at the rows of ketchup jars in the pantry, their vibrant red hues mocking her. What had they become? Were they truly helping people, or were they simply fueling a collective delusion? The doubt that had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks finally boiled over. She had to do something, she decided. She couldn't stand by and watch as her husband, and the rest of England, succumb to this tomato-induced madness. But what could she do? How could she challenge a belief that had taken hold so firmly, a belief that was being actively promoted by respected doctors and eagerly embraced by the masses? She didn't have the answers yet, but she knew one thing for sure: she couldn't let Timmy, or anyone else, be subjected to the false promises of ketchup cures any longer. She would find a way to bring some sanity back into their lives, even if it meant going against her own husband, even if it meant facing the wrath of a ketchup-crazed nation. Meanwhile, Tommy, blissfully unaware of Timmy's tummy troubles and Mrs. Mees's growing rebellion, found himself clinging precariously to a runaway cart. The Covent Garden Market was a chaotic ballet of sights, sounds, and smells, a far cry from the quiet predictability of the tomato patch. He'd been trying to find a place where his zest for life could make a difference, a way to bring joy to others, when this opportunity presented itself. He'd seen a delivery cart, piled high with fresh produce, break free from its handler. It was careening wildly through the crowded marketplace, threatening to topple stalls and trample unsuspecting shoppers. Without a second thought, Tommy had launched himself onto the side of the cart, grabbing hold of the wooden frame with all his might. The cart swerved violently, throwing Tommy back and forth. He clung on, his small body aching, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he couldn't stop the cart completely, but maybe, just maybe, he could steer it away from the most crowded areas, minimizing the damage. He strained against the momentum, pushing with all his might. The cart veered slightly, narrowly missing a flower stall laden with fragrant roses. A collective gasp rose from the crowd as the cart careened past, leaving a trail of scattered petals in its wake. Tommy gritted his teeth, his muscles burning. He was losing his grip. He could feel himself starting to slip. He needed to do something, and fast. He spotted a pile of soft sacks filled with flour and directed the cart toward them. With a final surge of effort, he managed to steer the cart directly into the pile. The cart plowed into the sacks, sending a cloud of white dust into the air. The sudden impact brought the cart to a halt, albeit an abrupt and messy one. Tommy, covered in flour from head to toe, tumbled off the cart and landed in a heap on the ground. He lay there for a moment, dazed and disoriented. Then, slowly, he sat up, brushing the flour from his face. A small crowd had gathered around him, their faces a mixture of concern and amusement. "Are you all right, lad?" a burly merchant asked, extending a hand to help him up. Tommy nodded, accepting the merchant's hand. "I think so," he said, his voice slightly hoarse. "You're a brave one," another woman chimed in. "You could have been seriously hurt." Tommy shrugged, feeling a surge of something he hadn't felt before, purpose. He hadn't stopped the cart for praise or recognition. He had done it because it was the right thing to do, because he couldn't stand by and watch as people got hurt. "I just wanted to help," he said simply. And in that moment, covered in flour and slightly battered, Tommy realized that maybe, just maybe, he had found his purpose after all. It wasn't about being a perfect tomato, or about fulfilling some predetermined destiny. It was about using his unique abilities, his zest for life, to bring joy and alleviate suffering, in whatever small way he could. Sarah's coughing fit. The air in the Blackwood home tasted of simmering broth, a frail bulwark against autumn's encroaching cold that gnawed at the edges of their existence. Sarah, perched on a stool by the fire, still trembled, a thick shawl her only defense. A convulsive cough ripped through her, shaking her slender frame. "Easy now, love," Dr. Blackwood murmured, his voice a calming presence against the turbulent air. He fussed about the kitchen, a flurry of anxious energy, stirring the broth with fervent, needless strokes, a deep crease etched between his brows. Just a little tickle. No cause for alarm. Yet alarm he felt. For days, Sarah's cough had been a relentless torment, its hacking echo reverberating through the house, each episode painting her cheeks a feverish red and filling her eyes with stinging tears. He'd exhausted his repertoire of remedies, honeyed lemon, warm nutmeg milk, even a strong poultice of mustard and rendered goose fat. None had offered respite. His gaze drifted toward a bottle of his homemade ketchup, its ruby depths gleaming in the firelight. He'd been consumed with refining his recipe, chasing the elusive harmony of sweet, tangy, and savory notes. He believed its potential boundless. And now, a new application beckoned. "I have an idea, Sarah," he announced, his voice tinged with cautious optimism. "Something that might just work wonders." Sarah looked up, her eyes holding a world of weary trust. Her father's tomato fervor knew no bounds, sometimes endearing, sometimes less so. "What is it, Papa?" she croaked. Dr. Blackwood's face lit up. "I'm adding a touch of magic to your soup. A secret ingredient." He winked, snatching the ketchup. "Packed with vitamins, you know. Just what you need." Sarah observed him with mingled anticipation and trepidation as he plopped a generous spoonful into her bowl. The red sauce bloomed in the pale broth, staining it a vibrant, almost startling hue. The aroma shifted, the delicate scent of herbs and vegetables yielding to the ketchup's sharp sweetness. "There," he declared, presenting the bowl with a flourish. "Drink up. You'll be right as rain in a jiffy." Sarah accepted the bowl tentatively, its warmth leaching into her hands. She lifted it to her lips, cautiously inhaled, and took a hesitant sip. The taste was unexpected. The ketchup's sweetness warred with the savory broth, creating a flavor both familiar and utterly alien. Decidedly, overwhelmingly tomatoey. She swallowed, fighting a grimace. "It's interesting, Papa," she managed, forcing a smile. Oblivious to her subtle discomfort, Dr. Blackwood beamed. "Interesting good, or interesting bad?" "Interesting, good," she placated, taking another sip, then another, resolved to give it a fair chance. She felt the ketchup glaze her throat, a sugary, clinging film. Then it happened. Another cough, more violent and piercing than any before, erupted. She choked, sputtering soup and ketchup onto the hearth. Her face flamed crimson, her eyes flooded with tears. "Sarah!" Dr. Blackwood exclaimed, rushing to her side, patting her back with frantic concern. "Are you all right? What happened?" Sarah struggled for breath, her body convulsing. The ketchup seemed to aggravate the condition, irritating her throat and unleashing an endless torrent of coughs. I don't know," she gasped, wiping her mouth. It made it worse." Dr. Blackwood's face crumpled, his brow furrowing as he glared at the ketchup-tainted soup as if confronting a viper. His miracle cure had misfired, leaving him with a sharp pang of guilt. He retrieved the bowl from her trembling hands, setting it aside. Perhaps it wasn't such a brilliant idea after all," he mumbled, his voice flat. Sarah leaned against him, still coughing, though the intensity subsided. "It's all right, Papa," she whispered, her voice weak but reassuring. "It was worth a shot." He held her close, stroking her hair, his mind in turmoil. He couldn't fathom why the ketchup had provoked such a reaction. He'd read of its curative properties, its supposed power to quell inflammation and strengthen immunity. Yet, in Sarah's case, it had only worsened her plight. He guided her back to the stool, wrapping the shawl more tightly. "I'll find something else," he vowed, his voice regaining a measure of resolve. "I won't rest until I discover what ails you." Sarah offered a weak smile. "Thank you, Papa." As Dr. Blackwood busied himself with another remedy, this time, a steaming mug of chamomile tea, Sarah observed him, her thoughts a whirlwind of contradictions. She loved her father deeply, admiring his passion and his unshakable faith in the virtues of tomatoes. Yet, a growing unease nagged at her regarding his ketchup obsession. Every ailment, every discomfort now seemed to warrant a spoonful of the crimson concoction. While she appreciated his efforts, she couldn't escape the feeling that his enthusiasm blinded him to reality. The ketchup hadn't helped, it had worsened her cough. And as she sipped her chamomile, she questioned whether her father's unwavering belief in its medicinal powers was, perhaps, misguided. Maybe, she mused, it was simply a condiment. A tasty addition to food, nothing more. Meanwhile, in the marketplace, Tommy savored the lingering warmth of his heroic act. The runaway cart incident had transformed the unremarkable tomato into a local legend. Passers-by stopped to offer pats on the back, showering him with accolades. No longer just Tommy, a tomato from Farmer Giles' patch, he was Tommy, the marketplace hero. He basked in the attention, the sense of purpose that had previously eluded him now firmly within reach. He spent his days traversing the market, offering aid wherever he could. He assisted stall owners with their displays, carried baskets for elderly shoppers, even brokered peace between feuding bakers over a coveted oven space. He possessed an innate talent for uniting people, for diffusing tense situations with a light-hearted joke or a kind remark. A natural peacemaker, a tomato with a mission. And that mission, he understood, was to serve others. Yet, even amidst the adoration, a persistent doubt lingered. He'd caught snippets of the escalating ketchup craze, the near-fanatical obsession gripping the city. He'd witnessed long queues for a bottle of the red sauce and heard tales of families rationing their food to ensure ample ketchup for every meal. He couldn't shake the feeling that this fervor was unhealthy. Was it truly about health and wellness, or something far more sinister? He'd noted the fervent glint in people's eyes as they spoke of ketchup, the almost manic excitement in their voices. More than a mere condiment, it had become a symbol, a source of hope, a panacea for every conceivable ailment. He recalled his conversation with Mrs. Mies, witnessing her mounting skepticism regarding her husband's tomato mania. Her words echoed, "It's all becoming rather much, Tommy. A bit unnatural." Shaking off the thought, he focused on the present. He was Tommy, the marketplace hero, making a difference, bringing joy. He couldn't allow uncertainties to overshadow his newfound purpose. Yet, as he strolled through the bustling market, the pervasive scent of ketchup heavy in the air, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was decidedly amiss. The ketchup craze surged, sweeping through the city like wildfire, leaving him to wonder where it would eventually lead. The ketchup cure fails. Mr. Abernathy recoiled, the tinny, sharp taste of Dr. Mrs. Scarlet Elixir a brutal assault on his senses. Across the table, Agnes wore a beatific smile, her cheeks flushed with zeal. "Just another spoonful, darling. You know what the doctor says, an ounce of prevention." He choked it down, the liquid scorching its path. Far from alleviating his chronic cough, as Agnes declared, it seemed to amplify it. For 2 weeks, he had obediently swallowed the increasingly inescapable condiment, praying for a modicum of relief. Instead, the dry, rattling cough reverberated through their small home. "Agnes," he rasped, dabbing his mouth with a napkin stained a disturbing crimson. "It's not helping. It's making things worse, I swear." Agnes's brow tightened, a network of wrinkles etching itself onto her forehead like furrows in tilled earth. "Nonsense, Thomas. It's merely purging the impurities. Would Dr. Mies mislead us? Just look at his kind face in that portrait. And his book, it's practically gospel." She brandished a well-worn copy of Culinary Observations on the Tomato and its salutary effects. The cracked spine and dog-eared pages spoke of Agnes's constant devotion. Thomas sighed inwardly. Arguing with Agnes in this state was akin to attempting to halt a flood with a pail. Since the ketchup craze ignited their village, fueled by pronouncements from Dr. Mies and the fervent, if somewhat unhinged, endorsements of Dr. Blackwood, Agnes had become a disciple of alarming intensity. Their larder now groaned under the weight of tomatoes, in every imaginable condition of ripeness and decay, and the scarlet sauce graced every dish with zealous abundance. He pushed away his plate, the sight of the ketchup-drenched kipper stirring nausea in his gut. "Perhaps its efficacy varies. Perhaps my constitution is resistant to its charms." A flicker of concern softened Agnes's face. "Perhaps. But we mustn't despair, Thomas. Remember Mrs. Higgins? She claimed her rheumatism was easing after just a week." Thomas remembered Mrs. Higgins quite vividly. He also recalled seeing her yesterday, hobbling along, her face a canvas of agony, no better, perhaps even worse. But he bit back his retort. He knew challenging Agnes's faith in the miracle of ketchup was a shortcut to marital strife. Meanwhile, in bustling London, a similar disenchantment was brewing. The initial euphoria surrounding the ketchup cure was beginning to dissipate, replaced by a growing unease. Those who had eagerly embraced the tomato-based elixir were discovering that their ailments remained stubbornly immune to its supposed healing power. At St. Bartholomew's Hospital, Dr. Giles Farnsworth, a physician renowned for his keen observation and skeptical bent, paced his office, a deep crease etched between his brows. Initially, he had dismissed the ketchup craze as a harmless eccentricity. But as weeks turned into months, and patients continued to inundate his clinic, their conditions unchanged despite their zealous consumption of the scarlet stuff, he began to harbor grave doubts. He reviewed his notes, a meticulous compilation of the cases he had observed. Coughs, catarrhs, fevers, aches, discomforts, none seemed to yield to the ketchup regimen. Some patients even reported feeling worse, plagued by digestive upsets and other unwelcome effects. He tapped his fingers on the mahogany desktop, the staccato rhythm a counterpoint to the cacophony of the city outside. He'd even ingested the ketchup himself, experiencing nothing beyond a slight stomach upset. Clearly, something was amiss. Dr. Farnsworth. A youthful apprentice, his face ashen, poked his head into the room. Mr. Davies is here. He claims his gout is particularly troublesome today. Farnsworth sighed. Mr. Davies was a frequent visitor, a prosperous merchant who had initially been a staunch advocate for the ketchup cure. He had even commissioned a bespoke silver ketchup dispenser, which he carried everywhere. "Show him in, Thomas," Farnsworth replied wearily. Mr. Davies shuffled into the office, his face a mask of pain, his left foot a swollen, inflamed monstrosity. He limped to a chair and collapsed into it with a pained groan. "Doctor," he croaked, his voice tight with discomfort, "I am at a loss. I have adhered to Dr. Miz's instructions implicitly. I've consumed prodigious quantities of ketchup, with every morsel, even between repasts. Yet, my gout, it's more agonizing than ever before." Farnsworth examined Davies's foot, his expression grave. "Indeed," he stated. "Tell me, Mr. Davies, have you altered your diet or routine in any other way?" "Nothing, doctor, absolutely nothing. Except for the ketchup, naturally. I've been adding it to everything. Even, on occasion, to my Earl Grey." Farnsworth suppressed a shudder of disgust. "I understand," he said again. "Well, Mr. Davies, I fear I bear unwelcome tidings. It appears that the ketchup is not alleviating your gout." Davies stared, his jaw slack. "But, Dr. Miz, the tome, the testimonies." "I appreciate your confusion, Mr. Davies. However, based on my observations, and those of my esteemed colleagues, it would seem that the purported medicinal qualities of tomatoes have been somewhat inflated." Davies seemed to deflate, his shoulders slumping with disappointment. "So, all this time, all this ketchup, it's been in vain?" "Not entirely in vain, Mr. Davies," Farnsworth offered, attempting to cushion the blow. "It may have enhanced the savor of your victuals. But as a palliative for gout, I fear it's proven ineffective." News of Dr. Farnsworth's findings, alongside similar reports from other medical professionals, began to circulate throughout London. The initial frenzy surrounding the ketchup cure waned, giving way to mounting skepticism. People started to scrutinize the declarations of Dr. Miz and Dr. Blackwood, questioning whether they had been misled. The demand for ketchup as a therapeutic agent plummeted. Apothecaries who had amassed substantial stocks of tomatoes and spices found themselves saddled with overflowing shelves and dwindling patronage. Market stallholders who had previously demanded exorbitant prices for the scarlet fruit were now forced to drastically cut prices, desperately trying to liquidate their perishable goods. Even Dr. Blackwood, secluded within his laboratory, began to experience a prickle of doubt. His daughter, Sarah, remained stubbornly unwell, her cough intensifying despite his ceaseless administrations of homemade ketchup. Her once sparkling eyes now held a tired, almost accusatory gaze. He watched her as she lay supine in bed, her face wan and drawn, her breathing shallow and labored. He had committed himself to discovering a remedy for her affliction, channeling all his energies and resources into his tomato-based research. But now, he was compelled to confront the possibility that he had erred. That his unwavering conviction in the medicinal virtues of tomatoes had obscured his judgment. Tommy, watching the change in public sentiment from his favored spot near the marketplace, felt a peculiar blend of relief and apprehension. The hysteria surrounding ketchup was finally abating, but he couldn't dispel the nagging feeling that something still wasn't quite right. The very air felt laden, permeated with an unspoken tension. The uncritical zeal had segued into a dazed disillusionment. He saw Mr. Abernathy ambling slowly through the square, his expression etched with disappointment. Agnes followed behind, clutching a half-empty bottle of Dr. Miz's ketchup, her face a study in subdued fervor. Tommy observed as Mr. Abernathy paused at a fruit stand and purchased an apple. He took a bite, chewing thoughtfully, his eyelids lowered. When he opened them, they appeared brighter, less clouded than Tommy had seen them in weeks. Perhaps, Tommy mused, things were gradually reverting to equilibrium. But a persistent unease lingered, a sense that the ketchup craze had unleashed something more profound than just a passing fad. Something unsettling. He suspected that the great ketchup cure fails would lead to some other outcome, one that would need his attention. He resolved to maintain vigilance, to remain attentive, and to be prepared to intervene should the need arise. His purpose, it seemed, was far from complete. The doctor's doubts. A palpable unease thrummed through the Royal Society's hall. Physicians, normally paragons of confidence with their crisp attire and pronouncements, fidgeted. The fervent anticipation of weeks past had evaporated, replaced by a hesitant uncertainty that clung tighter than the swirling Thames fog. Yet, Dr. James Mees remained a beacon of zeal, though even his typically robust voice wavered faintly. He stood before the assembled doctors, a bowl of glistening, diced tomatoes held high. "Gentlemen, colleagues, let us not be deterred by a handful of singular incidents. The tomato, I assure you, unlocks the door to unprecedented well-being." A ripple of murmurs swept the room. Dr. Farnsworth, his face still haunted by the memory of Mr. Davies's excruciating gout flare-up, cleared his throat. "Dr. Mees, with all due respect, the observed data remains unconvincing. Mr. Davies partook liberally of your scarlet elixir, and his state clearly deteriorated." Dr. Blackwood, ever the pragmatist, stepped forward. "Indeed, James. While initial reports held some failure, deeper scrutiny reveals a less spectacular outcome. We've noted some amelioration in certain individuals, especially those exhibiting, let's say, nutritional deficits. But a universal remedy? A considerable exaggeration, I'd suggest." Tommy, perched precariously on a tower of medical journals near the room's rear, felt a stab of disappointment. He'd hoped, perhaps naively, that the doctors would persevere in their search for the tomato's hidden gifts. He watched Dr. Mees's countenance deflate, his vibrant optimism seeping away like the juice from a crushed berry. "But in the antioxidants?" Dr. Mees faltered, his conviction faltering. The lycopene. Surely, you've observed the radiant hue. It denotes vigor." A younger physician, Dr. Eleanor Vance, a rising star esteemed for her rigorous investigations, spoke up. "Dr. Mees, we've thoroughly analyzed the tomato's makeup. Undoubtedly nutritious, rich in vitamins, minerals, and, yes, certain antioxidants. However, the concentrations simply aren't sufficient to substantiate claims of miraculous healing. A healthful food, certainly, but not a cure-all elixir." Tommy knew panaceas meant a cure for everything. The air in the hall grew thick with unspoken consensus. The fantasy of ketchup as a medicinal marvel was starting to dissolve. Later that night, Tommy found himself before Dr. Mees's home, a modest townhouse nestled on a quiet lane. He wavered, unsure about intruding on the doctor's undoubtedly deflated ego. But a gleam of lamplight in the window lured him closer. He peered through the glass. Dr. Mees was seated at his dining table, buried in heaps of research papers and morsels of tomatoes. Across from him sat a woman with a kindly, careworn face, Mama Mees. She was tenderly dabbing tomato juice from his chin with a linen square. "James, darling," Mama Mees said softly, her voice barely audible through the pain. "It's all right. You gave it your best shot. You were so thrilled, so eager to help people." Dr. Mees sighed, running a hand through his thinning locks. "But I was mistaken, wasn't I? I allowed my enthusiasm to blind me. I saw what I wished to see, not the reality." Mama Mees took his hand in hers. "Perhaps. But your motives were pure. And you did inspire people, James. You encouraged them to contemplate their well-being, the significance of fruits and vegetables. That's not inconsequential." She poured him a glass of water and nudged a plate of cheese and biscuits towards him. "Now, have some real nourishment. All that tomato juice can't be beneficial. Even if it were a miracle cure, which it's not." She added the last part with a knowing smile. Dr. Mees mustered a weak smile in response. "You've always been the voice of reason, my dear. Someone has to be," she chuckled. "Now, tell me about your day. Did you inflict that ghastly-smelling cod liver oil upon anyone today? I still maintain it reeks of old footwear." Tommy observed them for a few more moments, a sense of quiet understanding settling over him. Dr. Mizzy's ambitious vision may have stumbled, but his sincere wish to improve lives remained. And Mamami's, with her steadfast presence and unwavering support, was a reminder that even amidst disappointment, there was still affection, connection, and a humble, shared repast. The following morning, the mood at the Royal Society had markedly shifted. The frenzied urgency of previous weeks had waned, replaced by a more deliberate, scientific method. Doctors discussed the tomato's nutritive properties, its potential role in a balanced diet, and its culinary uses. The talk of fantastical cures had vanished. Dr. Blackwood addressed the assembled physicians. "Gentlemen, colleagues, let us be unequivocal. The tomato isn't a magical elixir. It remains, however, a valuable addition to human sustenance. Its rich vitamin makeup and antioxidant features render it a worthy subject of further exploration. We must examine its potential advantages with scientific precision and avoid the pitfalls of unfounded assertions." He paused, looking directly at Dr. Mies, who sat silently in the front row. "Dr. Mies, your initial fervor ignited a meaningful debate. While your initial pronouncements may have been optimistic, your zeal has undoubtedly enhanced our grasp of this captivating fruit." Dr. Mies offered a small, grateful incline of his head. He seemed relieved, almost lighter, now that the weight of impossible expectations had been lifted. Tommy watched as the doctors began to discuss concrete uses for the tomato. Dr. Vance suggested incorporating it into dietary guidelines for patients deficient in vitamins. Another physician proposed using it as a complementary aid for skin ailments. The discourse shifted from the realm of miracle cures to the more solid ground of evidence-based practice. Over the following weeks, the ketchup mania began to abate. The newspapers, once teeming with exaggerated testimonials and outlandish claims, now featured articles on the importance of well-rounded nutrition and the risks of depending on single superfoods. The public, initially swept up in the frenzy, began to regard the tomato with a more discerning gaze. The demand for ketchup persisted, yet it was no longer fueled by the desperate hope for a cure. People were using it as a condiment, a flavor enhancer, a simple pleasure to accompany their meals. The medicinal notion faded, supplanted by a more practical and enduring appreciation for the tomato's culinary worth. Tommy, no longer caught in the swirl of medical hype, found himself drawn to the lively marketplaces, where tomatoes were now sold alongside other fruits and vegetables, not as a miraculous drug, but as a wholesome component. He watched families thoughtfully choose ripe tomatoes, their faces reflecting a simple joy in the anticipation of a delectable dinner. He realized that even without magical powers, the tomato could still bring joy and contentment to people. It could be a source of flavor, a shared experience, a small moment of pleasure in a world that often felt overwhelming. And perhaps, he considered, that was a purpose deserving of pursuit. One afternoon, he spotted Agnes Abernathy at the market, carefully inspecting a basket of tomatoes. He approached her hesitantly. "Mrs. Abernathy," he inquired. She looked up, her eyes still holding a hint of sorrow. "Yes? I'm Tommy," he said. "I saw you at Dr. Miz's lecture. I'm sorry about Mr. Abernathy." Agnes sighed. "Thank you, Tommy. It was a trying period. I so desperately wanted to believe it would help him." "I understand," Tommy said. "But the tomatoes, they are still good. They can still be part of a healthy meal." Agnes looked at the tomatoes in her hands, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "Yes, I suppose they can. Perhaps I'll make a stew. He always enjoyed my stew." Tommy smiled back. I'm sure he would have cherished that. As Agnes walked away, Tommy felt a sense of quiet contentment. The tomato might not have been a miraculous remedy, but it could still offer solace, connection, and a small reminder of happier days. And in a world rife with uncertainty and disappointment, perhaps that was sufficient. His purpose, he began to grasp, wasn't about chasing grand illusions, but about discovering small ways to bring joy and connection to the lives around him. A taste for ketchup. The Royal Society's report may have dampened the fervor around Dr. Mrs. audacious claims, but it couldn't expunge the beguiling taste of tomato ketchup from London's collective palate. The initial mania, sparked by promises of panaceas, had ebbed, leaving behind a quieter, more grounded appreciation. The memory lingered, the zesty counterpoint to bland fish and chips, the surprising spark it lent to a simple bread pudding. Tommy, now a fixture at Mrs. Higgins' pantry, observed with amusement as jars once coveted for their supposed healing properties were uncorked with a different kind of glee, not the desperate hope for a miracle, but the pure anticipation of heightened flavor. One afternoon, a flamboyant whirlwind of a man burst into the pantry, his apron a Jackson Pollock of sauces. It was Chef Auguste, a name whispered with awe in culinary circles, famed for his audacious flavor profiles and relentless quest for gastronomic perfection. "Mrs. Higgins, ma chère," Auguste bellowed, his French accent as rich as crème brûlée. "I require a dozen pots of your exquisite tomato ketchup. And tell me," he lowered his voice in a conspiratorial hush, "the rumor of cloves. Is it true?" "Magnifique!" Mrs. Higgins, unruffled as ever, simply smiled and gestured toward her meticulously stocked shelves. "Indeed, Chef Auguste. A suggestion of cloves, a whisper of cinnamon. It's the soul of it, you see." Auguste clapped his hands, his eyes gleaming with inspiration. "The soul. Precisely. I have a vision, madam, a culinary tour de force that requires le ketchup as its cornerstone." He procured his ketchup, expounding on a new dish, a spiced ketchup lacquer for succulent roast duckling. Tommy, perched amongst jars of pickled onions, was mesmerized. He'd only ever known ketchup as a cure-all, a magical elixir. To hear it lauded as an ingredient, a building block for something novel, was a revelation. In the ensuing weeks, Tommy noticed a surge in sales, driven not by desperation, but by curiosity and an increasingly sophisticated palate. Experimentation bloomed. A butcher laced his sausage mix with ketchup, birthing a savory, subtly sweet sausage that became an instant sensation. A baker kneaded it into his bread, yielding a vibrant, rhubarb-red loaf with a tantalizing tang. The concept of ketchup as a versatile culinary instrument, rather than a medicinal miracle, was taking root. Recipes blossomed in newspapers and cookbooks. Home cooks began to improvise upon Mrs. Higgins' foundation, adding personal flourishes, a fiery kick of chili, a sharp tang of vinegar, a mellow spoonful of honey. One day, a bright-eyed young woman named Eliza entered the pantry, practically radiating enthusiasm. "Mrs. Higgins," she exclaimed, "I've been tinkering with your ketchup, and I believe I've created something truly special. I've swirled in a puree of roasted peppers and a pinch of smoked paprika. The effect is divine." Mrs. Higgins, ever open to innovation, sampled Eliza's concoction. Her eyes widened in surprise. "My dear, this is remarkable. A depth of character I never dreamed possible." Eliza glowed. "I call it smoky tomato relish. I'm considering selling it at the market." Inspired by Eliza's success, others began crafting their own ketchup iterations. There was Fiery Devil's Kiss, ignited by Scotch bonnet peppers, and Golden Sunshine Ketchup, crafted from yellow tomatoes and a hint of saffron. Ketchup was no longer a singular item, but a vibrant canvas for culinary imagination. Tommy watched, utterly engrossed, as the world of ketchup exploded with potential. He grasped that even stripped of impossible expectations, ketchup could still spark delight, not as a curative, but as a fountain of flavor and inspiration. Chef Auguste, true to his word, swept back into Mrs. Higgins' emporium, his face alight with triumph. "Mrs. Higgins, ma chère, the ketchup glaze. It's a triumph. The crowds are clamoring for a taste of my canard à la tomate." He bought another mountain of ketchup, then paused, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Tell me, Mrs. Higgins, have you contemplated a touch of brandy in your recipe? It adds a certain je espoir." The experimentation continued unabated. Ketchup graced pies, stews, even desserts. One audacious chef dared to create a ketchup-infused ice cream that proved both perplexing and strangely addictive. Tommy discovered a newfound sense of purpose. He was no longer merely a passive tomato awaiting his fate. He was part of something grander, more thrilling. He was a cog in the ketchup revolution, a revolution not of medicine, but of taste. He began to assist Mrs. Higgins with growing enthusiasm, sorting tomatoes, grinding spices, and stirring the simmering cauldrons of ketchup. He learned the nuances of her craft, the delicate dance of sweetness, acidity, and spice that made her ketchup so beloved. He even ventured to suggest his own variations, inspired by the other cooks and chefs. "Mrs. Higgins," he proposed one day, "what if we stirred in a touch of maple syrup? It would lend a subtle, smoky sweetness." Mrs. Higgins considered this, stroking her chin in thought. "Maple syrup, you say? Intriguing, Tommy. Let's give it a whirl." Together, they experimented, adding a measured pour of maple syrup to a fresh batch. The effect was nothing short of transformative. The maple syrup amplified the natural sweetness of the tomatoes, adding a subtle complexity that felt both comforting and unexpected. "This is it, Tommy," Mrs. Higgins declared, her eyes bright with excitement. "This is our new secret ingredient." Tommy swelled with pride. He had contributed to the evolution of ketchup, not as a miracle cure, but as a delectable and versatile condiment. He had found his place, not as an observer, but as a participant in the ongoing culinary adventure. The chapter on impossible remedies had closed, but a new one was unfolding, suffused with the scent of exotic spices, the bright tang of ripe tomatoes, and the limitless potential of ketchup. It was a story of taste, of ingenuity, and of the simple pleasure of adding flavor to the world. Tommy the tomato, once adrift and uncertain, was now a pivotal element in this delicious new narrative. He understood that true magic wasn't about curing ailments, but about offering a small measure of happiness, one flavorful bite at a time. He had found his calling, not in grandiose promises, but in the simple, humble act of creating something truly delectable. Sweetening the deal. The air in Mrs. Higgins' pantry, already rich with the savory perfume of simmering tomatoes and fragrant spices, thrummed with a novel vitality. Gone was the desperate tension of bygone days, when ketchup was touted as a panacea. Now, a brighter, more playful spirit danced within those walls, born of delicious experimentation. "More sugar, you think, Auguste?" Mrs. Higgins inquired, her brow creased in consideration as she observed the celebrated chef, Auguste, incorporate a spoonful of the pantry's whitest sugar into her ketchup. Auguste, whose name resonated with respect throughout London's culinary circles, had become a frequent visitor, drawn to Mrs. Higgins' creation like a hummingbird to nectar, though he was about to introduce genuine honey into the concoction. He paused, his usually discerning gaze now alight with mirth. "Precisely, Madam Higgins. Merely a whisper of sweetness. It tempers the tartness, you see. Imparts a certain elusiveness." He gestured grandly with his spoon, narrowly missing a shelf brimming with pickled onions. Perched on a stack of repurposed crates, Tommy watched the spectacle with wide-eyed interest. Never had he witnessed such assuredness with flavor, such willingness to refine an already successful recipe. Cooks he knew followed directives to the letter, but Auguste treated recipes as springboards for his own imaginative leaps. "And the vinegar, chef?" Tommy blurted, surprised by his own audacity. The query had escaped him unbidden. Auguste turned, his expression softening as he focused on the small boy. He knelt, meeting Tommy at eye level. "Ah, the vinegar. An indispensable element, young Tommy. It bestows the tang, the zest that awakens the palate. Without it, the sweetness would be cloying, overwhelming." He winked. A touch of vinegar, a hint of sugar, and suddenly, a harmony unfolds. To demonstrate, he added a splash of clear, pungent vinegar to another batch. The aroma transformed, becoming livelier, more intricate. Tommy inhaled deeply, fascinated. Vinegar, to him, had always meant sharp pickles and piquant marinades, never something as comforting as ketchup. The impact was immediate and undeniable. Eager patrons thronged to Mrs. Higgins' pantry to sample the revitalized ketchup. They lavished it on everything, roasted game, boiled eggs, even, to Tommy's utter shock, simple slices of bread. Their faces shone with delight, a genuine joy stemming purely from the taste. "It's exquisite," boomed a stout gentleman sporting a flamboyant mustache, ketchup smeared around his mouth. "The perfect foil for my mutton chop." A young woman, delicately applying ketchup to a plate of fried potatoes, declared, "It's more than mere medicine now, isn't it? It's a luxury." News of the improved ketchup spread like wildfire across London. Soon, Mrs. Higgins was besieged with orders, not only from apothecaries and physicians, though some still hoped for residual medicinal properties, placing occasional orders, but from restaurants, public houses, and private homes. Tommy found himself busier than ever, but he relished it. He thrived on the pantry's vibrant atmosphere, the constant flurry of activity, the contented sighs of patrons. He assisted Mrs. Higgins in measuring ingredients, tending the simmering pots, and bottling the finished product. He even began devising his own variations, inspired by Auguste's intrepid approach. One afternoon, during Mrs. Higgins' delivery rounds, Tommy ventured to add a dash of molasses to a batch of ketchup. The dark, viscous substance imbued the condiment with a richer, deeper profile, hinting at caramel and smoky undertones. He nervously presented it to Auguste, who was visiting to discuss a new creation involving pickled walnuts. Auguste tasted a spoonful, his eyes widening noticeably. He swirled the ketchup around in his mouth, dissecting the complex layers. "Tommy," he declared, his voice ringing with sincerity, "this is remarkable. You possess a true gift, my boy." He urged Tommy to refine his concept further, suggesting various spices and herbs to complement the molasses. Together, they experimented with cloves, cinnamon, and even a whisper of cayenne pepper, conjuring a truly singular and memorable ketchup. Mrs. Higgins, upon her return, initially expressed apprehension about Tommy's concoction. A traditionalist at heart, she felt trepidation at straying too far from her original formula. But after sampling Tommy's molasses-infused ketchup, her doubts dissolved. "Well, I'll be," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. "That's actually quite good, Tommy. Exceptionally good, in fact." They christened it Tommy's Molasses Ketchup, and it swiftly gained popularity, rivaling even Mrs. Higgins' original recipe. As ketchup gained wider acceptance as a condiment, Tommy noticed a gradual transformation in how people perceived it. The exaggerated promises of miracle cures waned, replaced by an authentic appreciation for its taste and adaptability. People no longer looked to ketchup for miraculous healing, but they expected it to enhance their meals. This evolution was reflected in recipes appearing in cookbooks and newspapers. Ketchup became a marinade for meats, a sauce for vegetables, even a component in savory pies and delicate desserts. Chefs experimented with its possibilities, crafting everything from fiery ketchup to honeyed ketchup to zesty ketchup. Swept up in this culinary whirlwind, Tommy discovered a sense of purpose he had never known before. He was no longer merely a tomato, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. He was part of something grander, something meaningful. He was helping to brighten people's lives, one delectable spoonful of ketchup at a time. As dusk painted the pantry in long, shadowy strokes, Tommy sat with Mrs. Higgins and Auguste, sharing a modest meal of bread and cheese, liberally adorned with their diverse ketchup creations. "You know," Mrs. Higgins mused, leaning back with a contented sigh, "I never imagined ketchup would become this ubiquitous. I simply wanted to make something useful, something that could help." Auguste chuckled warmly. "And you did, Madam Higgins. You crafted something truly special. Something that has brought joy to countless individuals." Tommy smiled, his heart brimming with pride. He glanced from Mrs. Higgins to Auguste, then down at the bowl of ketchup before him. He realized that ketchup's journey mirrored his own. It had begun with a false pretense, a misplaced faith in its curative properties. Yet it had evolved, transformed, and ultimately discovered its true calling, not in healing affliction, but in enriching life. And so had he. He was not a panacea, but he could be an ingredient, a flavor enhancer, a helper, and a friend. The night was still, punctuated only by the muted sounds of London life filtering through the open window, and the soft murmur of contentment that permeated the room. Tommy knew, with unshakable certainty, that his adventure was far from finished. There were countless flavors yet to uncover, endless recipes to imagine, infinite ways to bring joy to the world. And he, Tommy the tomato, stood ready for the journey. Tommy's epiphany. The waning sun painted elongated silhouettes across the fields as Tommy and Mrs. Higgins bumped along in the bed of Fitzwilliam's ramshackle wagon. The farmer, face a road map of wrinkles etched by wind and weather, held the reins with a peculiar gleam in his eye, a manic glint sparking there. Tomatoes galore, tomatoes to the horizon, he crowed, snapping the leather. Never witnessed such a thing. They used to rot on the vine. Now? I'm considering draining the duck pond to grow more. And all thanks to your miraculous condiment. Tommy, immersed in a sea of ruddy, bursting tomatoes, felt a disquieting twitch in his gut. The aftershocks of the ketchup mania still vibrated, though the fever pitch had subsided into a steady hum of fervent demand. The initial hysteria haunted him, the outlandish claims, the pleading desperation in people's gazes. It felt tainted. Mrs. Higgins, ever perceptive, squeezed his hand. Don't fret so, Tommy. This is a boon to many. Folks savor the ketchup, and Mr. Fitzwilliam prospers. You were instrumental in all of it. He mustered a weak smile. I know, but what troubles you, child? She inquired, her voice a soothing balm. Tommy hesitated. How to articulate the unease churning within? He didn't want to appear ungracious or belittle the good they'd wrought. It's just, remember when they believed it was a panacea? The relentless clamor. Fitzwilliam overheard, pivoting on the seat, brow furrowed beneath his cap. Well, that was a tad overblown, wasn't it? Folk get carried away. The nub of it is, they still crave the produce. And your sauce, Mrs. Higgins. The finest relish this side of London, they say. A wink punctuated the statement. Guilt surged through Tommy. He was being churlish. Mr. Fitzwilliam spoke truth, people were sated. Should he not revel in that? Yet, the memory of hopeful faces, shadowed by subsequent disappointment, clung to him. He couldn't shake the sensation of something amiss. As the cart lurched forward, Tommy's gaze drifted to the seemingly endless rows of tomato plants stretching into the distance. Each verdant sentinel, heavy with fruit, represented another bottle, another source of, what? Well-being? Not anymore. But maybe, contentment. Later that night, after aiding Mrs. Higgins in crafting a new concoction, a ketchup subtly kissed with smoked paprika, Tommy wrestled with insomnia. He thrashed in his small garret, the potent fragrance of cooked tomatoes and vinegar swirling in the air. Phantoms of those he'd seen clustered outside the shop danced behind his eyelids, the hacking youngster, the careworn mother, the stooped elder with his cane. They hadn't merely sought a flavoring, they craved a cure, salvation. He bolted upright, heart drumming against his ribs. He couldn't reconcile ketchup as mere table fare with the fervent expectation he had witnessed. Was he complicit in a falsehood, however benign? Drawn by a soft, lambent glow, he stole down to the kitchen. Mrs. Higgins stood there, fastidiously cleaning her cherished copper cookware. Tommy? What are you doing up at this hour? She asked, her tone gentle. He stammered, grappling for the words to express the whirlwind of his thoughts. I can't sleep, he confessed. I've been mulling over everything. Mrs. Higgins motioned him to sit. She offered him warm milk and settled across from him, her eyes a beacon of calm. Tell me what burdens you, dear. He inhaled deeply. It's the ketchup, he blurted. I know it's no longer a remedy. We both know. Yet, people they still anticipate something more. Mrs. Higgins nodded slowly, understanding etched on her features. It's difficult to abandon a belief, particularly when it proffers solace. But it's not ethical, Tommy countered, his voice gaining intensity. It's wrong to offer false hope. Mrs. Higgins reached across the worn tabletop, enfolding his hand in hers. Tommy, listen closely. Ketchup is not medicinal. But it can still spark joy. It can transform a plain meal into something special. It can foster togetherness. Tommy frowned, unconvinced. But is that ample? Mrs. Higgins offered a gentle smile. Sometimes, Tommy, ample is everything. She paused, her voice growing more serious. The world brims with hardship. If we can dispense a modicum of comfort, a sliver of delight, is that not worthwhile? Tommy pondered her words. He recalled the children gleefully dunking their fried potatoes, faces smeared crimson. He envisioned families sharing suppers, the flavors heightened by their creations. The pleased expressions of tasters sampling his smoked paprika ketchup flickered in his mind. A fresh realization began to dawn within him. He'd been fixated on the loss of ketchup's illusory healing properties, overlooking its inherent potential. It wasn't about vanquishing ailments or achieving miracles. It was about elevating ordinary moments, bringing a touch of zest and cheer to daily existence. He thought of old man Fitzwilliam, his face alight with the promise of a rich harvest. He thought of Mrs. Higgins, her eyes sparkling as she refined her recipes. He thought of the countless meals that would be rendered more palatable through their industry. Perspective shifted. He'd been consumed by regret that ketchup wasn't saving lives, blinded to the fact that it was enriching them. Relief washed over him, easing the tension that had gripped him. He wasn't a healer, but he could be a purveyor of gladness. He couldn't eradicate illness, but he could amplify flavors. He couldn't perform miracles, but he could craft moments of simple pleasure. He looked at Mrs. Higgins, his eyes reflecting newfound clarity. "You're right," he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. "It is enough. It's more than enough." His purpose wasn't tethered to grandiose, impossible expectations. It was grounded in the tangible, the unpretentious, the real. He could wield his culinary gifts to bestow pleasure, to conjure moments of lightness, to illuminate the world, one sumptuous bottle of ketchup at a time. The desire to aid others still pulsed within, but it had transmuted. No longer a frantic yearning to cure all woes, but a quiet aspiration to enhance the lives around him. He didn't require magic to make a difference. He rose, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. "I want to experiment with new notes," he announced, his voice bubbling with zeal. "I aspire to craft the most exquisite ketchup imaginable, not to mend bodies, but to spark smiles." Mrs. Higgins mirrored his smile, her eyes brimming with affection. "I knew you'd grasp it, Tommy. You possess a unique gift. Now, get some rest. Tomorrow, we've mountains of tomatoes to process." As Tommy ascended to his room, the scent of tomatoes and vinegar no longer felt oppressive, but comforting. He'd unearthed his vocation, not in chasing a phantom, but in embracing the reality of his capabilities and the potency of simple joys. He could still embody a hero, not through extraordinary feats, but by infusing the world with joy, one delectable bottle of ketchup at a time. The farmer's wisdom. Golden light spilled across the tomato field, each leaf jeweled with morning dew. Tommy stood at the edge, cool earth grounding him. The air, once a frenetic chorus of buzzing insects, now vibrated with a calmer resonance. The great ketchup cure craze, as some had cheekily dubbed it, had ebbed. Faded, tattered remnants of promotional posters, victims of wind and disillusionment, still clung to fence posts. He felt a twinge, not guilt, thanks to Mrs. Higgins' soothing influence, but a persistent disquiet. Had he unwittingly played a role in a charade? Old man Fitzwilliam, his face a tapestry woven from wrinkles etched by sun and weather, approached with a sturdy, time-worn gait. He bore a small wooden tray alive with seedlings, their vibrant green offering a stark contrast to the aged timber. A smile crinkled the corners of his eyes as he greeted Tommy. "Morning, Tommy. Splendid day for planting, isn't it? These little fellas need settling in. Demands holding steady, you know. Not for any cure, but for the flavor. Seems folks developed a taste for the stuff." Tommy watched him, a chunk of soil clinging stubbornly to the farmer's well-worn boot. It's odd, Farmer Fitzwilliam. All that commotion about healing, and now, just a sauce. A chuckle, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, escaped the farmer. He carefully set the tray down, each movement imbued with a lifetime of experience. "Just a sauce?" Tommy, lad, nothing is merely anything. Everything possesses a narrative, a reason. Even the most commonplace object. He scooped up a handful of earth, letting it trickle through his fingers. Consider this soil. Appears to be simple dirt, correct? But it's teeming with vitality, with epochs. Decayed foliage, prime-val minerals, the fossilized vestiges of beings long past, all cooperating to nurture these tender shoots. He indicated the seedlings. An entire universe within a grasp. His eyes twinkled as he looked at Tommy. And Ketchup, well, that has its own saga. A convoluted, intriguing one. Did you know its origins weren't even tomatoes? Tommy frowned, surprised. They weren't. He'd always assumed he hadn't really given it much thought. He'd been too preoccupied being a tomato, then a potential panacea, then whatever he was now. Nope, the farmer responded, shaking his head. The original ketchup, long ago, was a pungent fermented fish sauce. From China, so the stories go. The English acquired it, meddled with it, incorporating mushrooms, walnuts, all sorts of ingredients. Tomatoes entered the picture much later. It's undergone centuries of evolution, adapting to shifting tastes and eras. And now, voila, a tomato-centric creation that seems perpetually in demand. A novel sensation bloomed within Tommy, a seed of possibility. He had been so absorbed by the healing angle, by the misguided confidence, that he'd overlooked the broader, more compelling narrative. So, the farmer continued, expertly planting a seedling, even something as seemingly humble as ketchup boasts a rich and intricate lineage. It's a testament to human inventiveness, to our inherent compulsion to experiment and refine. He patted the earth around the seedling. And that holds true for everything, Tommy. Everything harbors a story worthy of being unearthed. One simply has to observe closely, pose astute questions. Tommy mulled this over. The posters were gone, the assertions debunked, yet people continued to savor the ketchup. Mrs. Higgins' words resonated, "You're bestowing joy, Tommy." Simple comforts, perhaps, but joy all the same. He pictured families gathered around tables, dipping fries with gusto, children creating edible artwork with it, the satisfying tang elevating the ordinary sandwich. He contemplated his own modest contribution to that experience. But it's just a condiment, Tommy stated, still grappling with the concept. It lacks any real significance. The farmer straightened, a subtle creak escaping his back. Significance? Tommy, what constitutes significance? Is eradicating disease the sole measure of worth? What about contentment? What about forging connections? What about enhancing the pleasure of a simple meal? He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand. Those elements also matter, Tommy. Perhaps not on a global scale, but profoundly to those experiencing them. And if you can contribute to that, even in a small capacity, you're accomplishing something meaningful. The farmer retrieved his tray of seedlings and progressed to the next row. Besides, he added, glancing back at Tommy with a mischievous glint, who can predict ketchup's future? Perhaps a new application awaits discovery, a novel flavor, a new way to savor it. Tommy, the narrative is far from its conclusion. It's merely beginning. Tommy watched him work, basking in the sun's warmth. The farmer's words sank deep. He had been consumed by the disappointment of the failed cure, obscuring the broader context. He dwelled on a single, sensational chapter, missing the essence of the complete book. He savored the memory of the ketchup's taste, the delicate harmony of sweet, sour, and savory. He imagined the production process, the blending of ingredients, the slow simmer, the meticulous attention to detail. He grasped that he was more than just a tomato, he was integral to something greater, more multifaceted. He was part of a story. And perhaps, just perhaps, he could contribute to the unfolding chapters. A sense of purpose, a thrill of anticipation, surged within him. He wasn't a miraculous remedy, but he was something else entirely. A distinctive taste, a cherished tradition, a small but vital component of everyday existence. He turned to the farmer, now humming quietly as he planted. Farmer Fitzwilliam, Tommy declared, his voice imbued with newfound conviction. I want to know more. About Ketchup, its past, its potential future. The farmer ceased humming and looked up, his eyes sparkling even more brightly. That's the attitude, Tommy, he exclaimed, beaming. That's the spirit. I have old books stored in the farmhouse. We'll begin there. And Mrs. Higgins surely has her own ideas. He winked. The world of Ketchup is vast and wonderful, Tommy. And you, my boy, are only just starting. Tommy grinned, a genuine, tomato-infused smile. The sun felt warmer on his leaves, the earth richer beneath his roots. The future stretched out before him, not as a pressure of expectation, but as a landscape of opportunity. He might not heal, but he could bring joy. And that, he realized, was a pretty grand purpose after all. The hum of the field, far from quiet, now pulsed with possibility, with stories waiting to be lived and flavors waiting to be created. Tommy's transformation. Sunlight, a balmy blanket, warmed the tomato vines, a sensation Tommy had taken for granted until now. He stretched, absorbing the light's energy. A vibrant hum filled the air as bees danced among the blossoms, a living melody resonating within him. He was no longer just another nameless tomato, destined for a bland salad or a forgotten sandwich garnish. He was a component of something larger, rooted in history and branching toward the future, Ketchup. More than just any ketchup. He recalled Farmer Fitzwilliam's words, a gentle echo in the leafy whisper, it's not simply about taste, lad. It's about the joy imparted, the memories conjured. That joy, that connection, fueled Tommy's aspirations. He yearned to be the ketchup that sparked a child's delighted grin atop golden fries, the ketchup that crowned a perfect burger, the ketchup that unlocked comforting nostalgia with each vibrant tang. This purpose ignited his growth. He drank in the sun's rays, drawing strength from the rich earth. He felt himself swell, his skin tautening with satisfying pressure. The pale green of his youth deepened, inching toward a rich, promising crimson. This wasn't mere surface change, it was a transformation from within. He could taste the sweetness intensifying, the acidity sharpening, the complex flavor profile defining him as ketchup developing daily. He caught the wind's murmurs, tales carried from the garden's other inhabitants. Cucumbers gossiped of brining and pickling, their voices sharp with anticipation. The onions, ever dramatic, bemoaned their fate of chopping and sautéing, though Tommy suspected they secretly relished the attention. Even the stoic potatoes seemed to harbor a quiet thrill for their destiny as crispy chips, longing for a generous dollop of, hopefully, Tommy. He pictured himself, smooth and glistening, emerging from a glass bottle, ready to fulfill his destiny. He mentally rehearsed the perfect pour, the satisfying gurgle as he landed on a plate. He imagined joyous faces as they tasted him, the shared moments of simple pleasure he would help create. But the path was crowded. Other tomatoes, bigger and perhaps even redder, sought the same destiny. He overheard murmurs of special breeds, clandestine growing techniques, and fabled ketchup recipes. A flicker of doubt arose, the shadow of his prior boredom. What if he wasn't exceptional? What if he was merely ordinary? He banished the thought, anchoring himself to Farmer Fitzwilliam's wisdom. It wasn't about size or redness or technical perfection. It was about joy, connection, story. He had a narrative to share, a legacy to honor, a future to craft. He would bring his own unique character, his own special essence, to the world of ketchup. He decided to confide in Belinda, the most robust, crimson tomato on the neighboring vine. She possessed an air of quiet wisdom. Belinda, he began, a tremor in his voice, do you ever worry about not being good enough? Belinda chuckled, a deep, resonant sound. Good enough for what, Tommy? To be crowned the most flawless tomato ever cultivated? A fool's pursuit. There will always be someone larger, redder, someone with an extravagant pedigree. But the ketchup, Tommy stammered. I long to be the best ketchup I can, but that how eludes me. Belinda shifted, her leaves rustling thoughtfully. The truest, best isn't about following a recipe blindly, Tommy. It's about embracing your essence, what you uniquely offer. You possess a kind heart, Tommy. I see it plainly. Allow that kindness to infuse your flavor. But what if my flavor isn't captivating enough? Belinda shook her head, a low rumble in her foliage. Every tomato harbors a singular flavor profile, Tommy. It's the culmination of sun, soil, rain, the caress of the wind through the vines. All facets of you. Don't aspire to be another. Embrace your own potential. Her words resonated, dissolving his remaining doubt. She was correct. He couldn't manipulate his size or the intensity of his color, but he commanded his attitude, his dedication, his willingness to embrace his unique attributes. He devoted the following days to precisely that, basking in the sunlight with renewed zeal, heeding the murmurs of the wind, absorbing the garden's very soul. He imagined himself blended with the perfect spice symphony, the sweetness of sugar balanced by the tang of vinegar. He envisioned being squeezed from a bottle, landing on a plate, sparking joy in a face. His thoughts also wandered to Ketchup's future. Farmer Fitzwilliam had recounted its history, its medicinal aspirations and subsequent fall from grace. But its potential? Could ketchup transcend its role as mere condiment? Could it become a versatile ingredient, a foundation for culinary ingenuity? Could it unlock new and exciting flavors, redefine the boundaries of taste? The possibilities danced in his mind, as tantalizing as the aroma of freshly baked bread. He imagined ketchup-glazed ribs, ketchup-infused soups, even ketchup-flavored ice cream, though that concept seemed a tad outlandish, even to him. He wanted to participate in this evolution, shaping ketchup's evolution, demonstrating its potential far beyond a simple sauce. The harvesting day arrived. A thrill of anticipation mingled with trepidation as Farmer Fitzwilliam approached his vine. He watched Fitzwilliam examine each tomato with practiced care, assessing ripeness and quality. The farmer's gaze settled on Tommy. Gently, he cupped him, rotating him to inspect every facet. Tommy held his breath, awaiting judgment. A smile illuminated Farmer Fitzwilliam's face. Now this, he declared, his voice laced with satisfaction, this is a fine tomato indeed. He carefully plucked Tommy and nestled him in a basket among his ripe brethren. A sense of camaraderie washed over him. They all shared a common destiny, transforming into something greater. As the basket journeyed toward the farmhouse, Tommy glanced back at the garden, at the vines that nurtured him, at the sun that nourished him. Gratitude surged within him for all he had learned, for the experiences that molded him, for the purpose that ignited his core. He was prepared. He was ready to transform into ketchup. He was ready to impart joy, create memories, become part of something transcending himself. He was ready to share his story, one delectable bite at a time. He knew, with unwavering certainty, that he would become the finest ketchup he could possibly be. And that, he concluded, was the only true measure. The rest, as they say, was gravy, or perhaps, ketchup. From tomato to ketchup. A subtle pluck signaled the end of his tether, a gentle yet resolute farewell to the vine. Tommy, now brimming with a newfound serenity, yielded without struggle. The world spun, a kaleidoscope of foliage and azure sky, before he landed amongst his kin in Farmer Fitzwilliam's broad, work-worn palm. "Well now, little fella," the farmer rumbled, his voice a familiar comfort. "Ready to spread some cheer, are we?" An inner warmth pulsed through Tommy, an unspoken affirmation. He was eager, more than ready. The trip to the farmhouse was a boisterous tumble, a tomato free-for-all. Tommy concentrated on poise, recalling Belinda's wisdom to embrace his inherent nature. He wasn't just another face in the crowd, he was Tommy, destined to be a ketchup that sparked joy. Inside, the farmhouse kitchen held the essence of seasons past, whispers of sun-baked herbs, lingering notes of spiced apple butter, and the hushed, earthy breath of wintering root vegetables. The air held a comforting familiarity, a haven where field bounty was elevated. Deposited into a vast, enamel basin, the cool water offered sweet relief from sun-drenched days. Tommy felt the field's dust dissolve, revealing his vibrant crimson. He felt clean, renewed, poised for the next phase. He watched as others received the soft brush caress, their surfaces gleaming under the kitchen's warm glow. Farmer Fitzwilliam moved with quiet grace, a practiced choreography perfected over harvests of transforming nature's gifts into culinary treasures. The subsequent step lacked such gentleness. Tommy, with a few companions, found himself transferred to a solid chopping block. The sharp thwack of the cleaver resonated, Farmer Fitzwilliam expertly dicing. Tommy steeled himself as the cool metal sliced through. A fleeting disorientation, a sense of dissolution, yet he remembered his purpose. He wasn't being destroyed, but readied. This was integral, a metamorphosis into something grander. He landed amidst a heap of chopped brethren, their collective juices forming a succulent pool. The fragrance intensified, a heady blend of sweetness, acidity, and vegetal zest. He felt their essence intermingling with his, a shared offering to the coming alchemy. Transferred to a generous copper pot, gleaming with a history etched in time, they awaited their fate. Farmer Fitzwilliam added sugar with a liberal hand, its crystals glittering. Then came the vinegar, a pungent tang that sparked Tommy's very core. Finally, the spice. Pinches of clove, cinnamon, allspice, and a teasing whisper of cayenne were measured out, filling the kitchen with a complex, intoxicating aroma that promised warmth and depth and a hint of flame. Submerged in the simmering crucible, Tommy felt a curious sensation. He was dissolving, yet simultaneously coalescing into something new. The heat coaxed out his inner sweetness, marrying it with the vinegar's bite and the spice's embrace. The kitchen sang with bubbling sounds and fragrant steam. Farmer Fitzwilliam stirred with steady, unhurried motions, his knowing eye gauging progress. Hours ebbed. The mixture slowly evolved, thickening, its bright red morphing to a rich, mahogany shade. The raw, vegetal note softened into a complex, savory fragrance that made Tommy's very being thrum with anticipation. He could feel the shift, his individual tomato-ness smoothing, blending into a cohesive whole. No longer just chopped, he was becoming something else. When satisfied, Farmer Fitzwilliam carefully spooned a sample onto a chilled plate. He paused, then tilted it, observing the ketchup's languid descent. He nodded, a quiet satisfaction creasing his face. Almost, he murmured, then added a final flourish of a secret, from an unlabeled jar tucked away. The aroma pirouetted, a subtle floral, almost imperceptible, note. Tommy recognized it instantly. A spark, a jolt of pure flavor amplifying all else. The pièce de résistance, elevating ordinary to extraordinary. After a final simmer, Farmer Fitzwilliam deemed the ketchup ready. Cooling slightly, he began to bottle, filling sterilized glass containers with the viscous, fragrant liquid. Tommy, now fully integrated, felt his essence poured into each vessel. Sealing the bottles brought a profound completeness. He had undergone transformation, a metamorphosis from mere tomato to complex condiment. No longer just Tommy. He was Tommy the Ketchup, ready to fulfill his purpose, ready to bring joy. Farmer Fitzwilliam carefully placed the bottles on a wooden pantry shelf, alongside pickles, preserves, and other homemade treasures, a testament to his skill. He paused, regarding the rows, a thoughtful expression. Another season, he murmured, almost to himself. Another year of sunshine on the table. He departed, leaving Tommy and his bottled kin in the cool, hushed space. The farmhouse hummed, a comforting reminder of encompassing life. Outside, Farmer Fitzwilliam planted new seeds, his weathered hands placing them in the nurturing soil. He knew the cycle would repeat, year after year. Tommy, safely ensconced in glass, felt peace. He had found purpose, not in avoiding destiny, but in embracing it. He was Ketchup, ready to brighten the world, one dollop at a time. He knew, inherently, that his story was just unfolding. The pantry shelves were merely the prelude to a grand adventure, one brimming with flavor, laughter, and the simple joy of sharing. He was Ketchup, and he was ready. The little girl's smile. The world dissolved. Gone was the dark, churning vortex, the coarse grip of Farmer Fitzwilliam's hands. Instead, cool, sleek glass enclosed him. A crimson tide, he poured, a viscous flow into a pristine bottle. Light, refracted through the glass, bathed existence in a rosy glow. A transformation occurred within. He was less Tommy, more the collective consciousness. Bound now to a larger purpose, a unified essence of crushed tomatoes, the sharp zest of vinegar, and murmured spices. He was Ketchup. Settling, he felt the weight of those above pressing him down, the glass a cool caress against his very being. This disembodied state was peculiar. He was no longer just a tomato. Individual cells, echoes of sun and rain, remained, yet melded, reborn as something altogether new. He was a flavor profile, a culinary promise, pure potential. The bottle teetered, then stilled. The clinking of brethren, muffled sounds of commerce reached him. He was adrift in transit. Lifted, then a jarring thump announced his arrival. Sunshine, unfiltered, cascaded through a nearby window. Distorted through the curve, he glimpsed a checkered expanse, a salt shaker catching the light, and a glorious heap of gilded fries, emitting fragrant warmth. He had arrived at a table. A family sanctuary, judging by the scattered detritus and lingering scent of spilled juice. Voices mingled, silverware chimed. He was integrated into a meal, a shared ritual. A small hand reached, tiny fingers, ever so slightly sticky, encircling his glass prison. A tremble accompanied his ascension. He was chosen. Inverted, pressure mounted. He was squeezed, the smooth glass a brief prelude to release. A thick, ruby stream issued from the bottle's aperture, pooling onto a humble, waiting plate beside the fries. He landed with a satisfying plunk, a concentrated burst of savory anticipation. He saw her. Lily. The name surfaced unbidden, a remnant from the field, a whisper on the breeze. 6 years, perhaps, her eyes bright and inquisitive, a constellation of freckles dusting her nose. Wheat-colored pigtails danced with each movement. She regarded the fries, then the ketchup, a silent query on her face. He sensed her hope, the unspoken question of his flavor. She selected a fry, its surface shimmering with oil. She held it with care, like a treasured jewel. Then, deliberately, she plunged it into the pool of ketchup he now constituted. He embraced the fry, enveloping its surface in his essence, his very reason. Lily raised it to her lips. Her eyes closed almost imperceptibly as she tasted. And then, her face blossomed. Not a grand pronouncement, not a theatrical display, but something deeper, more authentic. A delicate shift in her features, a relaxing of her brow, her eyes widening, a subtle upturn of her lips. A smile. Pure, unadulterated joy. It transfigured her, radiating outward and illuminating the whole table. A smile that could thaw glacier, banish shadows, and elevate the world. And he, Tommy Ketchup, was its cause. All anxiety, all doubt, all trepidation dissolved. The loss of self, the strange metamorphosis, the unknown future, irrelevant now. He had found meaning. Not in grand adventures, not in fleeting fame, nor in miracle cures or societal trends. Here, in this instant. This ephemeral flicker of happiness on a child's face. He was more than a mere condiment. He was a happiness delivery system, a catalyst for connection, a harbinger of smiles. He watched as Lily indulged again, her smile deepening. Another fry dipped, then another, each time mirroring the ritual of anticipation, satisfaction, and joy. He was being consumed, nibble by nibble, fry by fry. Eventually, he would be gone, emptied, his essence scattered. But he did not mind. He had achieved his purpose. He had imparted joy. A profound satisfaction swelled within, eclipsing prior desires for adventure and recognition. He was part of something grander, a cycle of growth, change, and giving. Sunlight warmed the table, highlighting the scene. He heard family laughter, glasses clinking, hushed conversations. He was woven in, an indispensable part of this shared moment. He was ketchup. And content. Lily glanced at the bottle, nearly empty now. More, please, she asked, her gaze finding her mother. Of course, sweetie, came the reply, accompanied by a warm smile. Tommy Ketchup felt a surge of warmth. More joy waited to be unleashed. More smiles to create. He was ready. He was waiting. He was Ketchup. She continued her feast, the fries vanishing under a generous blanket of ketchup. Each bite ignited a brighter smile, mirroring the joy he held within. A true symbiosis, a shared experience of unalloyed happiness. He bestowed flavor, she gifted purpose. Memories of the field flickered, the other tomatoes, ambitious dreams of adventure. Real adventure wasn't about traversing exotic lands or battling mythical beasts. It was about discovering meaning in the commonplace, making a difference in others' lives, scattering joy in simple acts. And he, Tommy Ketchup, did just that. A small piece of a vast world, a tiny ingredient in the recipe for happiness. Yet, he was fulfilled. Complete. Ketchup. As the final fry disappeared, Lily savored the lingering taste, a faint red stain whispering on the glass. A small, secret smile played on her lips, a shared understanding between her and Tommy Ketchup. Though gone, his essence lingered, imprinted on her memory, a reminder of simple pleasures shared with loved ones. His purpose lived on, even after he was gone. He was more than ketchup now, he was a recollection, a warm feeling, a brief spark of pure happiness. He was Ketchup, and he had mattered. Tommy's great adventure. A warmth bloomed within Tommy, a sensation unlike the sun-drenched days of his former, vine-ripened existence, or the simmering caress of the cooking pot. This was different, an inner luminescence, a miniature sun igniting at his core. It resonated through him, a vibrant hum that felt profoundly right, as he lay spread, a glistening ruby sheen, upon a perfectly crisp, golden-brown fry. Lily, her face alight with unadulterated glee, raised the fry to her lips. A tiny, involuntary escaped her as the flavor hit. And in that instant, understanding dawned. It wasn't a grand escapade with perilous journeys and unearthed empires. It wasn't a quest for the mythical genesis of the perfect tomato cultivar. It was this. This unassuming, pristine happiness he was instigating. More than a mere condiment, he was a catalyst, bridging the gap between a simple potato and pure delight. He was a brightening spark in Lily's day, a tiny flavor burst that coaxed a smile. The warmth intensified, becoming a comforting fire. He was making someone happy. He, Tommy, the once bored and seemingly insignificant tomato, was now a source of simple joy. The revelation struck him with the force of a summer squall, yet felt as gentle as the morning's first light. This was purpose itself. This, his true calling. Lily dipped another fry, her laughter echoing through the kitchen. He felt a dollop of himself slide onto the waiting potato. More ketchup, she chirped, brandishing the fry expectantly. He readily oozed from the bottle, a willing participant in this act of unpretentious bliss, landing as a perfect jewel of crimson. A profound contentment washed over him as Lily devoured it, her smile his reward, the flame in his heart his prize. He was part of something larger, a shared moment, a memory in creation. He pondered the other tomatoes, still clinging to the vine, fantasizing about epic adventures and escapes from their perceived monotony. A pang of understanding, not quite pity, resonated within him. They hadn't grasped that the greatest journeys weren't necessarily about distant horizons or courageous exploits. Sometimes, the ultimate expedition resided right where you were, in the art of gifting joy. He recalled tales of Ketchup's past as a medicinal marvel, the elaborate claims and desperate hopes pinned on its supposed curative powers. How convoluted, how unnecessary it all seemed now. He didn't need to heal or prolong life. He needed only to taste delicious, to evoke a smile. Lily finished the last fry, wiping her mouth, leaving a faint, revealing smear of red. Delicious, she declared, beaming. Her mother chuckled, glad you liked it, sweetie. Tommy swelled with pride. He had played a part in that delicious, a contributor to that slice of enjoyment. He glanced at the nearly empty bottle, devoid of fear or anxiety about his inevitable end. His purpose was clear, his legacy defined. He was Ketchup, and he was content. He wondered about the other ketchups, those lining grocery shelves and perched in restaurant caddies. Did they share his contentment? Did they understand the profound gratification of their existence? He hoped so, hoped they embraced their mission to bring a little sunshine, one fry at a time. He envisioned them, a silent legion of scarlet sentinels, battling blandness, boredom, and the mundane. They were the flavor champions, taste titans, the unsung heroes of the culinary landscape. And he, Tommy, stood among them. Tilted further, the final droplets clung to the bottle's sides. His time neared, yet he felt no trepidation. He had lived a fulfilling life, discovered his calling, experienced life's greatest adventure. The final squirt landed on a lone fry Lily had missed. Her eyes lit up as she savored it. The end. As he faded, his essence dispersing, a sense of peace, of completion, settled upon him. He had fulfilled his role. He had made someone happy. And that, he understood, was more than sufficient. It was everything. Oblivious to Tommy's final reverie, Lily skipped off to play. But a faint spark of happiness lingered, a testament to his existence, a reminder that even the smallest things can leave a significant impact. And somewhere, in the vast culinary cosmos, Tommy the Tomato, now Tommy the Ketchup, smiled. His adventure had just begun. A world of fries awaited, one delectable bite at a time. His purpose was sealed, his heart brimming, and his flavor, of course, impeccable. The end. Or is it? The final expenditure approached. Tommy sensed it, a yielding pressure against the bottle's slick skin, the culminating act of Lily's persistent squeeze. He had given everything, each ruddy drop dedicated to complementing her simple, golden fries. He watched, with curious detachment, as the diminishing crimson tide receded, leaving a faint, clinging stain. Almost gone. And without fear. He recalled the primal terror, the existential angst he'd known back on the vine, convinced his fate was monotonous mediocrity. He had yearned for adventure, exhilaration, a tale worth telling. He'd found it, not in grand exploits, but in the quiet fulfillment of lighting up Lily's face. A curious irony, that the most profound journeys resided in the smallest moments, that purpose wasn't a remote destination, but a daily choice. He pictured his bottled brethren, still lining supermarket shelves, perhaps still craving significance, still blind to the potential for brilliance simmering within their tangy depths. He hoped, with the last vestiges of his tomato essence, they'd find their own Lilies, fries to ennoble, reasons to be. The definitive push arrived. He felt the severance, a clean parting, and then oblivion. But was it truly nothing? A faint warmth echoed, a memory of sun-drenched vineyard days, the camaraderie of fellow tomatoes, the transfiguration, both frightening and thrilling, into something new. And then, most vividly, the taste. The vinegar's sharp bite, sugar's gentle caress, the subtle spice, all converging in a flavor symphony. He was that taste. The ideal counterpoint to a crisp, salty fry. He was, essentially, a memory. A delicious, fleeting, unforgettable trace. And that, he understood, was enough. But the tale wasn't complete. Even as Tommy, the singular Ketchup, dissolved from existence, his essence lingered, not just in Lily's recollection, but in a wider sphere. The very notion of Ketchup, its progression, its legacy, resonated with unexpected force. With a clarity transcending his present state of, non-being, he remembered the dusty volumes he'd absorbed during his brief existence as a table source. He recalled tales of Ketchup, the fermented fish sauce of ancient Cathay, a world removed from the sweet, tomato-centric concoction he'd become. He remembered the British adventurers who carried the idea back to Europe, experimenting with diverse ingredients, mushrooms, walnuts, even oysters, in a feverish pursuit of that exotic flavor. He remembered the gradual transformation, the imperceptible but unavoidable ascension of the tomato, that humble fruit, to its rightful dominion at the heart of the ketchup formula. And he recalled the nascent days of mass-produced ketchup, when the condiment was touted as a panacea for ailments ranging from indigestion to jaundice. The irony stung. Ketchup, once hailed as medicine, now relegated to mere accompaniment. But perhaps, he considered, its true curative power lay not in its supposed healing ability, but in its power to evoke joy, to amplify life's simplest pleasures, to transform a mundane meal into a moment of shared delight. He envisioned countless generations of ketchup aficionados, dipping fries, burgers, eggs into the scarlet elixir. He saw children laughing, families uniting, friends celebrating, bound together by the simple joy of a shared meal, elevated by the unmistakable tang of ketchup. An understanding dawned. He realized his narrative, the story of Tommy, the tomato transmuted into ketchup, was just a fragment of a larger epic. A saga stretching across centuries, spanning continents, a narrative still unfolding, one fry, one burger, one meal at a time. The history of ketchup was a tale of metamorphosis, of adaptation, of the unyielding pursuit of palatability. It was a chronicle of cultural exchange, of culinary ingenuity, of the enduring human desire to improve the taste of food. It was the story of how a simple sauce could achieve global recognition, a totem of comfort, a taste of hearth. A chronicle that merited being shared. He felt a gentle vibration, a connection with something beyond his individual self, something vast and timeless. It was the collective consciousness of all ketchups, past, present, and future. It was the echo of countless meals, countless moments of pleasure, countless contented sighs. He was gone, yes, but part of something larger. He was etched into the ketchup story. And that story, he knew, would continue its unfolding, long after his memory had faded. The depleted bottle rested discarded on the table, a silent marker of his existence. Lily, unaware of the inner life of the condiment she had just consumed, dabbed at her mouth and smiled. She felt a curious contentment, a warmth radiating outward. The fries had tasted especially good this evening, she reflected. Rising, she gathered her belongings, departing, leaving the empty bottle behind. But a strange feeling persisted as she walked away. Something subtle, something ethereal, yet something that had left an enduring impression. Perhaps merely the memory of a pleasant repast. Or something more. Maybe the lingering vestige of Tommy, the tomato become ketchup, who had discovered his purpose in adding a spark of happiness to the world. Alone in the darkening room, the vacant bottle stood as a quiet guardian of the ketchup saga. The saga of a humble sauce that had conquered the globe, one fry at a time. The saga of a tomato called Tommy, who had learned that the greatest odysseys are often found in the most modest of things. And somewhere, across the boundless expanse of the food universe, the spirit of Tommy smiled. He was no more, but his story was alive. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that countless fries awaited the dip.